Off a day and good morning, Guam. This public hearing conducted by the Committee on Education, Public Safety, and the Arts is hereby called to order at 9:18 Chamorro Standard Time. Notice of the hearing was disseminated to all local media outlets on September 13, 2023, with the second notice provided on September 18, 2023. A notice of the hearing was also made known on the Government of Guam public notices portal and via radio advertisement. This morning, the committee is holding a public hearing to discuss the following bills. Bill number 98-37 COR, an act to add a new Chapter 55 of Division 5, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, relative to mandating all Guam public schools to be ADA compliant, and to cite this act, the Guam Public Schools ADA Compliance Act of 2023, sponsored by Senators William Parkinson and Roy Quinata. Also, we'll be hearing Bill number 109-37 LS, an act to add a new subsection 4124B, 3, and 4 to Chapter 4 of Title 17 Guam Code Annotated, relative to providing parity by creating an exemption from completing the full 75 hours of service learning requirement for graduating high school students in school year 2023-2024, and instead require the completion of 35 hours of service learning for graduating high school students in school year 24-25, and instead require the completion of 55 hours of service learning. This measure was introduced by the Committee on Maritime Transportation, Air Transportation, Parks, Tourism, Higher Education, and the Advancement of Women, Youth, and Senior Citizens by request of the Kongressun Manhoben Guåhan, the Guam Youth Congress, in accordance with 2 GCA subsection 7102. And after a short recess, we'll also be hearing testimony on Bill number 63-37 COR, an act to add a new Chapter 14 to Division 2, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, and to amend subsection 5008.2 of Subarticle A, Article 1, Chapter 5, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to authorizing the Guam Department of Education to directly purchase its own solar photovoltaic system. This act was sponsored by Senators Agustin, Senator Roy Quinata, Senator Amanda Shelton, Vice Speaker Tina Muña Barnes, Senator Dwayne Nicolas, and Senator William Parkinson. We'll also be hearing Bill number 117-37 COR, which is an act to amend subsection 3102. Now 1 of Chapter 3, Title 7, Guam Code Annotated, relative to the duties of the Guam Education Board, sponsored by Senators Agustin, Senator Roy Quinata, Senator Dwayne Nicolas, Senator William Parkinson, and Vice Speaker Tina Muña Barnes. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues and welcome them joining us today. To my right, the Vice Chair of the Committee on Education, Public Safety, and the Arts, Vice Chairman Senator Chris Dwayne. Also, Senator Roy Quinata. On the far right, over here on the far left, Senator Telo, and seated immediately to my left, Senator William Parkinson. And before I begin, I'd like to go over the general rules of conduct. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by the chairman before speaking and shall state their name for record-keeping purposes. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to the character or motive of any senator or individual testifying is not permitted. The chairperson of the committee may order the removal from a hearing any member of the legislature in Guåhan who fails to observe proper decorum pursuant to the 37th Guam Legislature Standing Rules. Any violation of this general rule of conduct will result in the removal from the hearing by the host. I'd also like to acknowledge Senator Amanda Shelton joining us now, and we will now proceed with discussions on Bill number 98-37 COR. I now give the floor to the measure's primary sponsor, Senator William Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill number 9837, sponsored by myself, William A. Parkinson, and Roy A. B. Quinata, an act to add a new Chapter 55 of Division 5, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, relative to mandating all Guam public schools to be ADA compliant, and to cite this act, the Guam Public Schools ADA Compliance Act of 2023. The Americans with Disabilities Act was not simply ink on paper, but a symbol of the progress our great nation was making towards recognizing the rights of its citizens, of all its citizens. Now you might ask, does this apply to Guam? And the resounding answer is yes. We too are bearers of that dream. We too are accountable to those principles. Many of our schools were built before the ADA took effect. But the past does not give us a pass to remain stagnant. The past serves as a reminder, an echo of where we once were, and a beacon for where we should head. The fact that none of our schools are ADA compliant is not just an oversight, it's an injustice. Every child on Guam, whether living with a disability or not, deserves the same chance, the same opportunity to succeed and to strive for a better tomorrow. By denying our schools the necessary adaptations, we are not just sidelining our children with disabilities, we are telling them they don't matter, that they are not a priority. And that, my friends, is not the Guam we know and love. This isn't just about ramps and elevators. This is about dignity. It's about telling our children that we will move mountains to ensure they receive the education they rightfully deserve. We must come together with this commitment and passion to enforce the ADA in every corner of our school district. This isn't a mere suggestion. This is a moral imperative for us. See, I know what it's like to push somebody around in a wheelchair in a country that doesn't account for it at all. It's a different kind of hell. And we should not be putting our children through that. We should be putting these ramps and elevators for them, not just so that they can succeed, but so that we can all succeed as a society, knowing that we took care of the people that needed to be taken care of most. So let us rise up, not tomorrow, not in a year, not in 10 years, but let's start working on this now. We are in the process of trying to rebuild all of our schools to get them up to code. Let's not let the people protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act be forgotten in this process. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you very much, Senator Parkinson. Is there anyone here to submit testimony on this measure? Please come to the table. And again, just remind you that you state your name and the capacity in which you're testifying, just for the official legislative record. And we'll go ahead and start with you, Mrs. G. Good morning.
Good morning and buenos dias, senators. I am here this morning not as a board member. I am here this morning as a private citizen, and I advocate for all students. My name is Maria Atalik Gutierrez. Senator, I wholeheartedly support your bill. I'm sorry I don't have enough copies. I brought this during the board meeting on November 20, during one of the meetings on November 2021, because I was at James Guerrero. I was actually there because the principal messaged me that the debris from the dilapidated classrooms are still there. And it's so funny because before I left for my surgery in 2021, they told me it will be removed. So when I went there, the principal told me, and I hope the principal is not going to get in trouble. Mrs. G, I said, would you like to see the classrooms of the students? I said, sure, because I love going to the schools. I'm an elected official, just like all of you, and you're all welcome to come visit the 41 DOE schools. But sometimes I'm told, you're not supposed to go to the schools. Why? I answer to the people that put me in this position. I'm not appointed. I never want to be an appointed member because I don't want to answer to one or two individual. I want the people that believe in me for all the years I've been on the board. I'm the longest board member, and I'm proud because now I'm a great-grandmother of public school kids, and I'm not going to stop. And I brought this concern. And the article of Guam, the Post, GEB's Gutierrez concern about ADA compliance. So I went to this classroom. When we opened the door, it was the special ed classroom. And then here comes a student being pushed by a school aide in a wheelchair. And he was having a hard time trying to make that wheelchair go into the classroom. And yes, Senator, I know how you feel of being in a wheelchair, because I was in a wheelchair after my surgery. And it really scares me when my granddaughter said, Grandma, I'll take you to Disneyland. I said, I don't need to go to Disneyland, because I don't want to use my walker. I said, she said, I have a wheelchair for you. Yes, I heard this ADA compliance is just for new buildings, new schools. What about the old schools? Being on this board, there's not that many students before in wheelchairs, but now they are. But bad enough, they're not being provided wheelchairs when parents ask. And I have a picture of a wheelchair that was given for this new school year to a school. It's broken, it's moldy. But I'm told, you interfere too much. Senators, I'm sure you're going to get a report that Mrs. Gutierrez, Maria Gutierrez, to the Ethics Commission here is interfering. If I have to be a complaint filed against me because I'm doing my job to advocate for the kids, so be it. I'm not scared. I'm not the board member that will sit at every meeting and receive my $250 stipend and keep quiet. I started on the board as a parent advocate. I was the first parent to be a voting member on the Territorial Board of Education when it became an elected member, elected board. Yes, we need to provide our kids with the ADA compliance at all the schools. I've been to the schools, and no one's going to stop me from the board or the superintendent that I have to report downtown if I'm going to a school. I heard you yesterday, Senator, because I do my job. Kids are very happy. Employees are happy when they see us going to their school. But I'm not going to sit back because I have to do my job. And I thank all of you for being here today to hear this, because this is has a lot to do with DOE. We need to provide the compliance, the ADA, whether our schools are 50 years old. Let's move away from that thinking. That's so I asked the principal, I'll ask someone to make a simple ramp for that child to be moved into the classroom. And I invite you, senators, if you have the time, I know you're busy, come to the school and see. Because I'll tell you, of all the board, I think I'm the only one that have gone to all 41 schools. Because it doesn't matter if they're saying you're micromanaging for going to the school. I go there to the school because I will not know what's really happening if I don't see it with my two eyes. But thank you, Senator Parkinson and Senator Quinata, and I urge everyone to please push this through, because if you don't, it's going to be the same old that has been happening, and the movement is very slow. The ship has not even sailed that far to pass to Lover's Point. But I will continue, even if I'm not on the board, I will continue to advocate for the kids, especially those kind of kids. Because, you know, they are very special. And then the National State Board of Education, that I am a Western Director, Board of Director, children with special needs are very important. So for me, the board didn't have time to discuss this as a whole. I'm sure at the board meeting, they will take a position, but for me, I'm here today, not as a board member, as a citizen, a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother, and for all the students that need this compliance. Se Deus must.
Thank you, Mrs. Gutierrez. Mr. Swanson?
Yes, good morning, Senators. I'm speaking in support of the bill. I just want to make a couple comments to make sure that they're considered as you go forward with this process. I spent a day yesterday on one of our buildings that was, I don't have a written testimony on this one. I do have on one of the other bills. So this is, I just wanted to get this on the record. I was in one of our buildings yesterday that was built in 1958. There's nothing ADA compliant about it. There's been an attempt to make access available when you're thinking about wheelchairs, but other considerations need to be kept in mind. I looked at the review process and the timeline for developing a report and that sort of information. That's entirely doable. I do want to caution the legislature that there's going to be a price tag with that. That as I look at our facilities, need a tremendous amount of work. So we need to consider that going forward once we know just how big the elephant is. I also would caution that we need to look at building code enforcement on the island, because we have newer facilities that in a renovation project should have been brought up to ADA code and they were not. So we had to take a look at how buildings are inspected in this process, especially public buildings. And that's all I have to say on this matter. And I know that the board supports it and my staff does. We want to make these changes as well.
Thank you, Superintendent Swanson. Attorney Summerfleck, did you have testimony to provide?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
As usual, I'm not either in support or opposition of any bill. I don't want to be in that position, but I do believe it's important to bring forward a couple points to you all.
Sir, if you don't mind, just if you could state your name and title for the record.
My name is Daniel Summerfleck. I'm the Executive Director of Guam Legal Services Disability Law Center. We are the protection and advocacy program for the territory of Guam. Okay, thank you. I think I've got my mic right now. I guess my position on this bill is more to sit here and to educate you all. The ADA was passed in 1990, so 33 years ago now. And we're just now coming forward and saying our schools need to be accessible. And we need to develop a plan to make them accessible. And then the remedies you're putting forward, are they going to report to you all and to the public as to their progress? We're talking about a 33-year-old law that's already on the books, and my position would be that if this is not in compliance, then the question should be instead, why are you not in compliance? It shouldn't be bring yourself to compliance. It should be, why have you failed to comply with the national law? Why are you discriminating against people with disabilities? And I would go so far as to opine to you that it's even more than 33 years ago. It goes back to 1975 when the Rehab Act was passed that said you need to make public facilities accessible to persons with disabilities. So 33 years, my math's not that quick, 73 or 75 to 23, 40 some years. And I guess that's what I see when I look at this bill. I look at it as saying, okay, do an assessment, report to the legislature. What does that mean? How many reports to the legislature are you going to receive? And when you find out that most of the doorknobs on most of the schools are not ADA compliant, what are we going to do? You know, and where is there money to say that this is an important issue that we want them to comply with? So the concept of the bill to assess our schools and make them accessible is sound. I'm not criticizing that at all. But where have you given any teeth to anyone? Where is there anything in this bill that provides anyone the ability, like our federal law says, sue them to enforce compliance? Sue them to enforce compliance. Now that may sound dramatic, but as we're already experiencing, parents coming forward to say, I want to sue a school because they're not accessible, and I want to be a signatory to a lawsuit that says that the schools are not accessible. Like I said, this isn't a new law. You know, I can say I've never filed a lawsuit against GDOE about accessibility of the schools. And I file lawsuits based upon who comes to my office and who seeks assistance. I filed lawsuits about ADA compliance of the bus system. I filed lawsuits about accessibility of sidewalks. But I can't think of a case that was filed on behalf of students to say that this building's not accessible. This classroom has over a 3/4 inch lip. The reason the lip to the door is important, if you look at our doors, like your door, it's relatively flat. You can roll a wheelchair in. You get over 3/4 of an inch, now you've created an obstacle or a barrier to a wheelchair. So I would also opine that physical accessibility needs to be a priority to make sure that children can enter their classrooms. And I'm not saying that a lot of these children don't have one-to-one aides that can assist them over some of these hurdles, but at the same time, why should they? Why should they have to have someone help them so that they can do what everyone else that walks into that classroom can do? Walk in under their own power, at their own time, at their own desire, and enter a classroom. So I guess when I look at this, if I were going to suggest to you priorities, one priority I would suggest is stop treating, if you're going to put a canopy up for children without disabilities, why can't you put a canopy up for the children with disabilities? You know, Agagna Heights is an example. At Agagna Heights, children in wheelchairs, when it's raining out, well, and my information may be wrong, I may be outdated, so I apologize to the superintendent if that's already been corrected. But children in wheelchairs at Agagna Heights had to be carried up the regular stairs when it was raining because it's raining and there's no cover. So if I were looking at prioritizing some of these issues, I would look toward those very simple, well, not simple, straightforward, but how are children with disabilities being treated differently at different schools? Do they have the ability to enter, exit, and to maneuver around their school environment? if there's a stairway to get from one part of the school to the other part of the school, right away the answer is they can't. They can't access what other kids at that school can access. So I would prioritize in this writing something to say when it comes to physical accessibility, when it comes to an accessible toilet, when it comes to an accessible bathroom, those things should be a priority. And again, I would opine to you all, look at what our basic life functions are. Who doesn't have to use the bathroom? Now I imagine some kids may be saying, I don't use the bathroom at school ever. I go before I go to school and I go when I get back from school. I don't know. You know, I knew when I was in high school, you know, there were certain bathrooms that certain groups could use, and only those groups could use it. Perhaps I went to a worse high school than our high schools here, but in the smoking or the drug bathrooms, no one entered those. So what do we have? You know, are we saying to our kids, cross your legs until you get home because you can't use the bathroom at your school because it's not accessible to you? You can't wash your hands at the school because you can't get your wheelchair under the sink to wash it? You know, are we saying that those things aren't important to kids? Are we saying that those things aren't a priority for anyone, any living human being, to be able to use the bathroom facilities? So I would look at prioritizing, and maybe that comes in the next step of this bill after you have a list of compliant and non-compliant aspects that you then prioritize. But my biggest point to you all is give these parents some teeth. Give them a route to make a complaint. Give them a route to come to you all and say, I've got this report, I've got it. What are you now going to do with this list of items? So, in principle, the bill is good. In follow-through, and in whether it's going to serve the needs of our children, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. When is the report due to you all? If it's due in 6 months, is 6 months appropriate waiting for children with disabilities to be able to use the bathroom? So those would be my thoughts. My biggest thought is, what is this bill going to change? Other than providing us an inventory. There's no timeline to make it accessible that I noticed in the bill. They're going to make a report. They're going to make another report. What's going to happen with that report? And if I can opine, you have in your adequate education law a provision about reporting every month to you all. Did you ever receive any of those reports for the last 15 years? I would wager to say no, because I haven't found them anywhere. So what happens when they report? When is that report going to come to you? Right now, we're redoing schools. There was in the newspaper talk about redoing the doors at JFK. Did they replace, is the door hardware ADA accessible? And I want to point one thought out to you all. I've been doing this work for a while, a number of years. An ADA accessible door is easier from everyone who uses it. By ADA accessible door, I'm referring to the doorknobs that are kind of like a curve or a flat, so you can push them down with your elbow, you can push them down, you don't have to grasp it to turn the knob. I put those on my house when I started doing this work. They're 1,000 times easier to get in and out of your house. All you have to do is unlock it, hit it with your elbow, you're in. You don't have to turn a doorknob. You don't have to do any of that. That, to me, is very straightforward accessibility that benefits every user of that area. Why can't we put it on our doors? And the reason I know about doorknobs, and particularly doorknobs at the schools and accessibility, every election we go out to the schools because the schools are used as election sites. We go out and we have to modify so that voters can access the classrooms. We have to give instructions. This door can't be closed because it's not accessible if it's closed. We have to put treatment on the doorways so that individuals with disabilities, mobility disabilities, can access. There's a lot of work to be done here, and that's why I would say looking at it and putting some priorities in here as to what's the most immediate priority may be wise. Oh, and my mic's off again, guys. Sorry about that. They keep coming up and changing my mic. So I'm not going to say I support, because then I might potentially be lobbying. The principle of the bill, I think, is sound, but I think changes need to be made. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Summerfleck. Ms. Evangelista Cepeda, are you here to testify on this bill?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, buenas, everyone, senators. I'm here because I'm very passionate about, as you can see, about this. When I was in the Board of Education as an elected board member, I fought to be the chair of the federal programs. I fought. I lobbied with all my others. I said, I don't want anything. I just want the federal programs because there needs to be plenty changes. Everyone's always saying that the federal side of DOE has all the money. I'm here to say, instead of, and I'm not picking on anyone, I'm not mentioning any names, but I'm a person from the outside looking in now, okay? You have all these people going on junket trips. It pisses me off. 12, 14 employees all at one time. If you tally that money that they spent doing that, doing all that, on tax, I take it back, not Guam taxpayers' monies. I want to make that correction, but taxpayers' money at that. Did anybody ever say that money, send one person, require them to come back, like when I was on the board, when it was a governing board, require them to come back, give them 1 month to provide training to the rest of everybody? And the board members, I remember Mrs. Gutierrez and I, we sat in and literally watched the trainers of trainers train. It was feasible. It was more common sense. Now you have, I hear, and I'm not even on the Board of Education. Oh, you know, Ms. Vanjie, 16 people all went. Then they stopped by and did vacationing at everyone's expense. For me, monies that are available should go to the ADA. I applaud Mr. Summerfleck for finding, because you have him against 3,000, 4,000 employees because he feels like he's going against DOE. He's not going against DOE. He's going to fight for those parents that don't have the ability to fight for their children. What if it was your children? I don't know about you all, but if you know me, I'm a fighter. My son had a disability with DOE. That's why I ran for the board. I said, not enough to complain. Step up, step out. And I ran for the board. My Lago people voted for me. And I fought for that. Because the IEPs, things were mentioning no sense of HIPAA. How does 10 people at this school knew about my son's disability? That infuriated me. I said, if you want me to first to sue, I will sue DOE. You know? But I made that correction. Okay, you guys are the experts. Correct the problem. I'm just saying here, you know, we're very big, we're a very reactive community. We're not proactive. The 10% that are proactive, oh my God, you wear us out. Okay? I don't get paid to be here. I had to sign comp time to be here. But I'm here to say to you that I have voted for every one of you sitting up there. Passionately. And when I vote, I'm like, vote! So I expect you to, please, Use your conscience, be passionate about it. Not because it's popular, because this is not the popular thing to do today. It's the very unpopular thing to do. I had my sister tell me, don't go support this because, I've got my school. I don't care. I sleep well at night. And I don't want to run for senator because it's a whole lot of work. Not enough pay, and everyone's never happy. I applaud all of you up there. I'm telling you to make the conscious decision today. Do the unpopular thing. Let the people be your report card when they vote for you at the next election. Don't worry about these other people. I don't worry about it. They talk about me anyways. I'm okay with that. I try to do the right thing, not the popular thing. And sometimes people tell me, oh my God, you're a wild card. I'm wild, but I make sense. And I'm going to say today is how many people came here to sign up for this? Not very much. Because nobody wants to do it. But we are so quick to say, when a school aide, 1-8, slaps a student, oh my God, fire him. Well, was he properly trained? No, because all the big people get trained so much, they better have a PhD in expertise in disability, God knows what else. And I'm not knocking them down. All their education, as my good resting Father in heaven says, Tibali education, taught to common sense. Tibali. It doesn't make sense. And I'm very passionate today. Because I came in here and I prayed, of course, as you guys know. Every time I come in, I don't bring my paper because I pray and I say, Lord, I leave it to you. I'm going to do what I do best. I'm going to fight for whatever, even if it's the one person. And I'm telling you now, I feel like I'm going to be teary-eyed for Mr. Summerflake. Because, you should have seen when GDOE went in, all the school administrators, I think that was like, I'm exaggerating, felt like it was 400 people at the courtroom. One man walked in alone. You know what I said? God bless his soul. He's the Lone Ranger. He should run for senator. He's going to win. He should run for governor. He's going to win. Because the people may not speak up all the time, but people vote. And when people are upset and disappointed with this government system and how it's working, then you know people are going to come out to vote. Okay? And I'm here to say that this has to be fixed. Get all that returning federal money back is a sin. It's a crime. Why didn't they use that? Don't tell me you can't do it. There's a will, there's a way. Put it back into the systems. Do the little things that matter. The sink. If you require a homeowners association to comply with ADA compliant, and Ms. Tello knows this, because we deal with this. If the government requires a private condominium to do X number of parking stalls for their homeowners in a private community, then by golly, DOE deserves that. DOE deserves that for those students who cannot speak for themselves, who will be bullied. They're bullied every day anyways. You got to give them some dignity and give their parents some dignity. And some parents are not vocal and they feel like their hands are tied because they're fighting a system that has been so far going on and nobody wants to correct this. Senators, I come to you today. I have no children in school. But when I was at DOE, all my DOE individuals, I made it very clear why I ran. I ran because my son was ADA. It required it. And for 2 years, they passed my child around like he was a piece of pencil. And then when I ran for the board, I fought for that committee. And they were at attention. Why should it be that way? Why should it be that I have to run and then attention, do everything I want to do? Why? Why? Why does it take that? Now people are suing the DOE. It deserves so. That's why there's the 14 points of adequate education. I was on the board when that was signed into law. It was signed into law for a reason. To give you guidelines, what needs to be complied. I'm just saying, senators up there, I come before you and I come to you and I say, make the long systemic problem, change it, make it right, correct the problem for these children, their parents. Stand up for those people. I'm not going to repeat what Mr. Summerfleck said because he said everything legally. I'm not here legally, although it is legal and it's required. And they're hardworking people at DOE, very hardworking. So I don't know how they teach. I could not teach in there because I'm old school. You disrespect me, I'm going to tilik ears. They'd sue me for reals. But I'm here to tell you, make the wrong right today. And I say to you that training needs to be conducted. Why is it that, oh, the one-to-one school aides are 9-month employees? Nobody cares about them. But we have all these teachers up there in central office, teacher 3, teacher 4, coaches. They need to be in the classrooms. These are the problems. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. They take a person that's in central, that is supposed to be doing computers, and they move him to Beneventi to substitute. Get the teachers out there. What happened to the 14 points of certified teachers? That's sugarcoating it again. And our school system, we have really educated people. So, too educated for me. You don't need an education to be a parent. You just need to love your parent, stroke them, feed them good, spank them when they need it, correct the problem. That's what you need. You don't need an education to be a parent. And some of the best parents are not educated. I'm just saying to you today, don't let this man walk in like he did the courtroom, the Lone Ranger, God bless his soul. And I just watched it. It just broke my heart. Then I said to myself, wait a minute, I'm a taxpayer. If all the school administrators are here, who's watching the schools? Oh, don't tell me it's a non-certified teacher watching the entire school. I'm just saying, things can be fixed. They cannot tell me there's no money. If you're going to return money back, don't tell me there's no money. Don't. And if a private property has to be required to do ADA compliant, like extra parking, X number of parking, every time at a condo that I manage, for example, if there is X number of, we have to put another and find a way to comply with an additional parking stall. We have to comply with public health requirement for the pool permits. Then why can DOE comply with the ADA, with the federal money? They got Division of Special Ed, then they got federal programs. Two separate entities with large amount of monies. When they write that, because you have formula grants, where you automatically get money, because you have X number of disabled students. And then you have competitive grants. You got all those experts there? Why don't they write competitive grants? Oh, no, I take it back. It's too much work. It's tedious to write competitive grants. Write competitive grants. Get it so that these buildings, these schools, become ADA compliant. But we have too many people doing repetitious work. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to know this. I'm not here to blow nobody's horn. I'm here today to say that this ADA compliant needs to happen. There are a lot of new members on this body. There's a reason why the people elected you new people. They want change. They want different. They want correction. You can't go 2 years and not do nothing, people. The people are tired of it. And unfortunately, Senator Barnett, you hold this committee. So I'm holding you to the fire on this. I don't know how else to say it. If I was in your position, I'd want to shoot myself. No offense. Don't take that literally. Because it's a handful. But this needs to be corrected, senators. And I'm not going to keep repeating myself, but I'm here to say, make the wrong right. Ask yourself, if these were your children, and had disabilities, would you do it? And not only one or two individuals with disability are cared for because I know somebody at DOE. That's crazy. So what happens to all the poor families that can't afford it, that are not as educated or outspoken? What happens to the grassroots people? They just suck it up and think this is okay. It's wrong. So I hold all of you here today that you support this. Support this, because it's way beyond this. And before I close, I'd like to say this. When we were a governing board, because I'm going to speak on that. When we were a governing board at DOE, the reason it was good, and I'll tell you why, is because when we come before this body, you can't say, oh, the principal. We can't blame nobody. You know who you're going to blame, senators? The governing board. That's who you blame. Because when we were the governing board, Senator Agustin handled all of infrastructures at schools. They were so sick of seeing him, but he was there. He knew the problems. And oh boy, we got out, and guess what? Went back to policy. And I'm just saying, nobody wants the governing board. Because the governing board, but just keep this in mind, board members, before I close. The governing board is elected by the people. It holds the people elected these bodies. So when they elected these bodies, they're held accountable. Okay? Give it to the people. Govern that board so it can hold these people with the money problems to address it. So today I come to you and I am in support with this ADA compliance for the DOE systems for our children. And you're right, it's not a larger number, but you have one extreme to another. Some can't speak, others can speak. Others need a wheelchair, others are autistic. There's variations. I'm just saying, imagine a normal child going to school and doesn't speak up because he's bullied or mamala or shame or whatever. Imagine 300 times for a person with disability. That's all you have to do. And so I say in closing, please support this bill, and I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Cepeda, for your testimony. I'd like to thank everyone who testified on this measure. Is there anyone else who would like to provide testimony? Okay, I did have a couple questions, and I'm going to defer to the main sponsor, and then we'll go down the line. I'd also like to recognize my colleagues, Senator Sabina Perez, Senator Dwayne Nicolas, and of course, Senator Joe San Agustin. Thank you all for your very passionate testimony. I agree that this is an issue that has gone unaddressed for too long. I did have a question for Attorney Summerfleck. Attorney Summerfleck, could you explain some of the exceptions that are granted for ADA compliance? Are there any that are granted for buildings that were built before 1990 in your estimation?
There are some grandfather clauses. However, in my mind's eye, I don't know that they're going to apply to any of the schools because these are public institutions. You know, for example, if you had a dentist's office and you were there prior to the enactment of the ADA, you may not be required to make it accessible. If you have less than, I believe it's 15 employees, some of the ADA doesn't apply to you. And I think the question about exceptions really shouldn't apply to our schools. You know, generally those exceptions apply to businesses. Like I mentioned earlier, the Rehab Act of 1974 pretty well covered everything that had to do with public accommodation from the government. The ADA is kind of the icing on the cake, basically saying, okay, it's not only publicly owned properties, it's all properties. Why do we just make government-owned properties accessible but not private properties? I can't answer directly whether there are exceptions that could potentially apply. Obviously, there's always an exception under the ADA if it's not feasible. You know, for example, on the sidewalk case, one of the issues was how do you make the sidewalk level and still have access into some of the buildings that are commonly used. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's the Cristobal Church, I think it is. It's right past the Micronesian Mall. It's kind of built up on a hill. In order to access their property, it's kind of got a steep driveway going into it. Well, that steep driveway also affects the accessibility on the sidewalk. So exceptions are made in certain situations where it's not feasible. I can't think of many in the educational setting where it's not feasible to make it accessible, and I don't think there are exceptions for public buildings.
Thank you, Mr. Summerfield. You had mentioned a mechanism or an avenue for public school stakeholders, whether they be parents, students, staff, to make complaints about ADA compliance. Can you explain that mechanism? Is it in place, as far as you understand, for the Guam Department of Education?
Not that I'm aware of.
Superintendent, are you able to speak to this?
Generally speaking, any concerns, whether it's ADA or accessibility or program access, that conversation starts with the building principal and the individual family. I had one yesterday that was a truancy issue. It happened to be one-on-one with the parent and me because we encountered each other as he was looking for the superintendent because somebody didn't listen to him. We've already got that one resolved. But no, it's any concerns that families have with the situation in the school needs to start directly there. And I am looking at the whole ADA thing because I was frankly appalled when I came here to see the condition of our schools. But it's not a simple fix, but we can certainly do a lot. And I agree with the testimony that's been given so far today.
I would just say that a lot of times doing the right thing isn't easy, right? Superintendent, so are you in receipt of numerous complaints about ADA compliance?
No.
Oh, okay.
We have some specific cases that we're working on, but no, not generally.
Okay, so I'm a little bit foggy on which hearing it was because we've had so many in this committee relative to education, but there was a hearing that we held in this room, and I had asked the question, as we do the work to come into compliance, at that point it was to come into compliance with Public Law 37-4. Obviously that scenario has changed, but the reason I bring it up is because my line of questioning was, as we go through the schools and we bring them into compliance with these public health standards, are we also going to be trying to level up our ADA compliance? For example, with the issue of the doorknobs and the restrooms, I know that we're doing restroom repairs and renovations across the district. We're also, it's my understanding, replacing pretty much every door in the district. So if you could speak to these two efforts as we move along and undergo these efforts and these jobs, are we going to be bringing things like the doorknobs and the restrooms into ADA compliance?
We have 3 projects in the procurement process right now for rehabilitation of ultimately all of our campuses. In that, when you do a renovation, you're required to come to ADA standards. Now it's going to be incumbent upon us to monitor that work progress to make sure that's exactly what happens. I will say that as I've been going through our facilities, that's going to, one of the biggest access things that I've seen is the door width to the restrooms. So a student that's got a cambered wheelchair that's otherwise pretty mobile on their own can't get through the doorway. It's got to be 36 inches wide, and I see doorways that are 2 feet wide. So those kinds of problems we're going to have to address building by building, doorway by doorway, to make sure that they are compliant.
So may I ask, in the meantime, if you have a cambered wheelchair that requires a 3-foot entrance, the entrance is 2 feet, what do these students do in the meantime to go to the restroom?
We have usually, it's case by case when you look at the building, usually we have 2 or 3 restrooms that are wheelchair accessible, but they may not be necessarily in the areas where students are, so they have to make a special trip, and we need to remedy that.
Mrs. Gutierrez had brought up Juan Guerrero, I believe, and there was we had a hearing here discussing specifically special education issues, and I believe what she was talking about was the canopy at Juan Guerrero had been under repair, and so we had received testimony that wheelchair-bound students with disabilities had to be pushed up through the mud and the grass when it's raining. To your knowledge, has that situation been remedied at Juan Guerrero?
I don't believe it has been yet. That is in the project that we have in procurement to do that work.
That's very disappointing, but thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Want to defer to the Mrs. G?
Senator, you asked about, is there anybody at DOE that oversees this? And Senator Agustin, you remember, I don't know if Senator Dwayne, at one time, they have the Office of Cirujano.
Yes.
And they go, when there's a parent complaint, but when my 2-year term on the board, and I left, then I came back, the Office of Cirujano was abolished, not funded. And when we talk about the ADA compliances, when I visited our schools for, not this school year, last school year, on the board there's 4 members on safe and healthy schools. Myself, Dr. Okada, Lou Benabenti, and Mr. Peter Alexisada. Francis Santos was the acting superintendent at that time, so I said, we're going to visit the schools. We don't have to report downtown, because it's like if you're going to visit the school, you have to go downtown, check in. Elected officials. I invite you. You go to the school. You don't have to check downtown. Elevators are not working. The schools that have elevators, there's a sign out of order. I asked LBJ, Tamunia Elementary School, what's wrong with your elevators? I don't know, Ms. G, this is already since before I came here, like 4 or 5 years ago. So those schools that have the elevator, they're not working. So what do you do for the students? This classroom that should be entitled to be on the 2nd floor, say, oh, we have to put them on the 1st floor. And here we go back. Why are you denying that child to be on the 2nd floor? They like to be up there so they can see the view. So it's an issue. It's an issue, and you had your oversight last week. I commend all of you. I was watching, and every single concern that you guys brought up, I support you. Principal was texting me, we're feeling sleepy. I saw one principal was yawning. I don't know why they were called here when it should be in management. And Senator, you and I went, right after you were sworn in, you asked me, Ms. G, what school should we visit first? I said, let's go to GW. And you saw how it is. We were there way before you came into office. We walk around. Francis Santos, the chair, the vice chair, myself, Lou Benabenti, Mr. Fieldovis. Issues. So, yes, elevators is the issue. You check, ask the superintendent for a list of how many schools have elevators, how many schools have RAM. If you go to Malesso Elementary School, Senator San Nicolas, maybe you're very close to Malesso Elementary School. Please go and see the RAM that they built there, because it's like for the skateboard. You know, a school aide or a teacher holding on to that student and lose control, zoom, they're gonna go say, what is it? Bingo, because they're gonna be all the way to the parking lot. I don't know who designed that. That's not ADA compliance. I have, Attorney Summerflex, I've seen him at every hearing or oversight, and I really commend him because he's advocate for the students. So just to let you know, we do have under the board now, they have to report the compliance office. And when you see this school is not in compliance, this school why? I was chastised. There's a complaint against me for speaking at that oversight hearing here, senators. But I'm not gonna stop. Just the same when people come to you and tell you something, don't stop. Listen, please. Listen to them. I have an email that I received today from a parent at JFK regarding her son. And and they say, when there's a complaint, forward it to the superintendent. Well, this is not really during Dr. Swanson's time, and I did. I referred to the acting superintendent at the time. And Lord, maybe all this parent, her concern was she has not heard anything about her son, and her son has a special need. I just got this when I was sitting back here. I thought he was taken care of. Am I micromanaging for this parent to send me when I refer to the department to be taken care of? No. So, senators, I commend my former colleague, Ms. Cepeda, because she and I are the loud mouth on the Guam Education Policy Board. We
Thank
don't
you.
stop. We take our job seriously. And the same with all of you, I commend you. Because you're not going to satisfy everybody.
Thank you, Mrs. G. Could you forward me that email if you don't mind?
Yes, I will.
Yeah. Attorney Summerfleck, I did have, it was kind of my first thought when I saw this measure introduced, because as you had mentioned, ADA is a federal law that was implemented in 1990. So with this bill, we're creating a local law to force GDOE to comply with the federal law that they're not complying with.
I think what I see in the bill is an effort to assist the Department of Education in making compliance. The assessment, the comprehensive plan within 180 days. The difficulty I have is it a plan to plan, or is it a plan of action? Are we requiring them to make the schools accessible, or are we requiring them to plan to plan? One of the biggest pitfalls that we fall into in Guam is planning to plan. The federal government gives us potential of millions and millions of dollars, and it all starts out with a $50,000 or $100,000 seed money to plan, to develop the plan. We generally never get past the seed money to plan to plan. And I think part of the reason for that is we're too busy planning to plan and not busy enough planning to implement. In my world, I go to a lot of meetings. The most frustrating meetings I go to is where I sit down and everyone starts planning to plan the next meeting. We haven't even started the meeting yet, but we're planning to plan the next meeting and where it's going to be and what we're going to talk about at the next meeting. And then lo and behold, the meeting's over and we haven't done anything. And that's part of my concern here. After 180 days, they come up with a comprehensive plan. Okay, then what happens? Then they report to you their progress as to whether they're moving forward on their comprehensive plan. And what if they're not? What are you going to do? And I guess that's where I have difficulty. If it was a comprehensive plan, if it's not implemented within, there's not signs of implementation within 60 days, after a half a year of planning to plan, what are the consequences? If it's not implemented in the example that Ms. Gutierrez just gave, if it's not implemented, what have we accomplished? We've got a lot more planning. We've got a lot more reports circulating. We've isolated out, I assume in 180 days, we know what we need to do. Where is the hierarchy? Like I mentioned, what's number 1 priority? What's number 2 priority? What's number 3 priority? And I think that's where the legislation could be improved to say the number 1 priority is that children go to the bathroom. It may sound silly, but clearly it's an issue. If you can't roll a wheelchair even into a bathroom, we've got trouble. So is that our number 1 priority? Is our number 1 priority making sure that all the doorknobs? And I guess that's where you all as policymakers can step up to the plate and say, we want children to go to the bathroom within 60 days after you've completed your comprehensive plan. Or we want to know what's preventing you from children going to the bathroom. If it's, as Dr. Swenson says, that the building was just built poorly and the door frames are 24 inches when they need to be 36 to be accessible, how many door frames do we have that are 24 inches? How long is it going to take us to complete modifying all those doorways? Are there some doorways that can't be modified? If so, how are we going to accommodate that dilemma? Are we going to take a classroom and turn it into a bathroom? What are we going to do? So if I were looking at it, I would look at more than a plan to plan. I would look at putting our priorities in place. And to me, saying a child can use the bathroom seems like a pretty straightforward priority, number 1. You know, no pun intended.
Thank you, Mr. Summerfleck. You know, I agree, and then some might call us hardliners up here, but I'm all for ADA compliance, and I totally agree with what you're saying. Plan to plan to plan to plan to plan. Look at the situation with the public health and safety guidelines for the schools. We demanded immediate action through Public Law 37-4, and the pushback from Adelup on down to even here in the legislature was frustrating. And now we're in this situation where not only are we not in compliance with ADA, but we are having our kids attend schools that haven't even met the basic public health and safety guidelines. So as policymakers, it is frustrating to see that many of these policies aren't being adhered to or complied, but I think we also have to have the support from the top all the way down to the Department of Education to move in these directions that really I feel like we don't have any choice in moving towards. I feel like you're right. We know where we're not ADA compliant, and we should have already been addressing this. I mean, when we had the hearing and we talked about the student at Juan Guerrero getting pushed through the mud and the grass and the rain, I would think that the Guam Department of Education would remedy that situation immediately. When we have situations where the Guam Department of Education is being sued, you know, from the families of students who attended Ocean View and Agata Johnston, I would think maybe, you know, common sense, because I don't have BULA degrees, but that the Guam Department of Education would go to these two schools and address these issues in this lawsuit immediately instead of allowing them to continue to fester. And that's the situation we're in. And I'm sure my colleagues have plenty of questions and plenty of input, but I do want to defer to the main sponsor of the measure for his comments and questions. Senator Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the speakers today, especially you, sir. I really appreciate your perspective from a legal point of view, and I appreciate your process in terms of differentiating between a plan to plan and a plan to implement. In my opening statement, I said the American with Disability Act was simply not ink on paper, but a symbol of progress of our great nation. But why is that? Why is it not just ink on paper? Because we, the people, give the words on paper meaning. Now, I don't know what has happened in the last 50 years that our schools were not ADA compliant. I'm not here to cast blame or to cast aspersions to people who've come before me who I know did the best they could. But that doesn't change the fact that we have a problem today. Many of our schools were built before the ADA took effect, and I'm sure there's all sorts of grandfather justifications for why they weren't updated. But these are public institutions. And even if there were grandfather things that, held them over for the short term, going on 40, 50 years later, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable that we have not made the update. When we ask this of our private institutions, but we don't hold ourselves to that same standard. We should be setting the standard that everybody else follows. For people with accessibility issues, life can be very cruel and hard. There's no shortage of meanness in the world that will show themselves to them. So in their formative years, we need to show them that kindness and that care and that priority at home. So when the cruelty and the meanness of the world comes, they know that there was a home that took care of them, and they have the strength to persevere. Again, this isn't about ramps and elevators. This is about dignity. We want to talk about goals. My goal is accessibility. That every student should be able to go to school and do the basics, use the bathroom, drink some water, wash their hands, go to lunch, go in and out of their class. And they shouldn't need special treatment. They shouldn't need a special aid or a special ramp or some sort of special thing. Those are fantastic. God bless DOE for doing that. But that shouldn't be required. It should be the standard. We should set the standard. And as we rebuild, because Guam is in pretty rough shape, but as we rebuild, we should build back better. We should build back stronger. And we should not forget the kids who need this American with Disabilities Act. And not just the kids. I'm a numka too. But by God, let's start with the kids. And if we could do with the kids, we could do it for other people. But let's start there. I said earlier we must rally together with commitment and passion. Passion is what made me bring this issue up today. But it's commitment that will solve the problem. So, for as long as I am here, these words will not just be ink on paper. It will be my passion and commitment, not just to myself, but everybody here on this legislature. Some people would put the burden solely on the chair, but I don't think that's right. This burden's on all of us. I am not a father, but these are all our children. Let's treat them like they matter. Thank you again for everyone for your comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you very much, Senator Parkinson. We'll now go to our colleagues in the order of their arrival, starting with Senator Tello-Taitigui. Senator Taitigui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, and thank you, everyone, for coming to testify. You know, this is something that we should have done a long time ago. Even when the ADA compliant came through in the building code, it gave enough time for us to actually be in compliance, you know, for the older buildings that have these exceptions. You know, the exception was just short term, you know, to give the ability for these other area or buildings to come into compliance. So you know, it's very disappointing, you know, and to see that we're here right now. And I, you know, I've been an advocate for individuals with disabilities, and like you said, it's not a popular subject, you know, and I commend the author of the legislation for going after something like this. That was one of the first things I did when in the 30th Guam legislature, is introduced 3 bills for people with disabilities and assisted them. So here we are today. You know, I hate to say it, but, you know, I'm worried that we're not going to be able to get this bill through to actually make a difference, other than another plan to plan, you know, like Mr. Summerflake mentioned. You know, it's frustrating. So my question is, Superintendent, do we actually have, does DOE stand ready to team up and prepare this plan and train personnel required of Bill 98-37?
I see no barriers to that in our organization, but I want to comment very bluntly. I was appalled with the situation when I got here and saw that none of these things had been done literally for years, for decades. And it is beyond my understanding how that could have been allowed to happen at all.
So my question again, do you have a team standing by ready to?
I have the capacity with my folks between our special education department, who are aware of these, and engineering capacity to evaluate what we have, make recommendations, and go through the process of getting this done. It's
Okay,
a big process, but yes, we can do it.
Okay, so that was my question. Second question is, there's a section in here with an audit that requires, that must be conducted by accessibility expert, you know, and this was brought up in April 17th in an interview by the acting superintendent at the time, former Speaker Judy Wampat, and she had that question. Do we have the expert that's needed in this bill for an accessibility? Is there somebody on island that can do this audit?
Licensed civil engineers are capable of doing that, and if in design projects, they are the ones who evaluate the design.
So we have the expert?
Yes.
Okay, to do it. So we've got people standing by, ready to do this. We've got the expert in place. Okay, so my next question would be, you know, of course, you know, being fully ADD compliant is clearly something we have to do. And what are the biggest obstacles and ongoing issues throughout DOE campus affecting ADD standards? What is the biggest obstacle at this point?
I think that the most current obstacle is that this has not been an issue in the forefront of people's minds as they do, for example, do repair work.
So are you ready to make this on the forefront of your mind?
Yeah, it's not that difficult to do, and we will make sure that we do that.
Okay. You know, would it be prudent to include the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or maybe this is Attorney Summerflick, you might be able to answer this one, since you're the expert in this field, and I appreciate and commend you for continuing to fight for those with disabilities. Would it be prudent to include the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA Act, with this ADA compliance measure to ensure we're getting all of the federal funding available?
No.
Okay.
IDEA deals directly with education of children with special needs. For example, a child could have a physical disability and not even be part of IDEA.
Okay, so it would not cover everything then. So not incorporating IDA is not going to be beneficial as far as federal funding? Because we know that this bill is going to cost quite a bit of money to be in compliance.
I would say that whatever federal funding that the department is receiving, they will continue to receive whether or not we have a bill for ADA compliance or not.
Okay.
It may be the ability, by passing this bill, you may provide an opportunity for the department to apply for certain grants to move them toward ADA accessibility. But I don't see how integrating IDEA at all comes into play with ADA compliance, to be very straightforward. And if I might, Senator, there's a bit of background with the ADA that I think is important for us all to realize. The ADA was a Republican bill passed by Senator Bush. The focus of the ADA was to eliminate the exclusion of persons with disabilities so they can be productive members of our community. The provisions about employment, the provisions about public facilities are all intended to provide a whole sector of our population with access into our community. The obvious result of that is in the hopes that rather than being recipients of public funds, that they would have true employment and the ability to intermingle into the community. The importance of having a good education system is exactly that as well. If we don't maximize the potential of our children with disabilities through the education system, we're certainly not going to maximize them as adults. And I think that's where the important issue comes here. We need, and I think someone else brought this up as well, we need to start looking at prioritizing this education aspect, because everything else and later in life depends upon it. For a child who goes through our education system and believes or is not provided access, where do they go after high school? They don't go anywhere, I can tell you that. That's the importance of this sort of bill, so that we provide equality and accessibility to all of our kids. And the reason I say the background is important is because that's really what this bill is about. Let's take these people with disabilities off of our welfare rolls, off of our public assistance, and let's let them be what they want to be, which is productive members of the community. So I guess in looking at this, I think looking at the purpose of the ADA when it was originally acted is important. It's not meant as for lack of a better way of saying it, oh, these poor people with disabilities bills. It's meant as these people have potential. We need to get them into the workforce. We need as many of them as we can working so that they can produce for our government and our society. But as to your original question, I don't think the IDEA and the ADA mix very well. I mean, they're both laws that are focused on persons with disabilities, but ADA is 100% disability. And I guess not focused on educational potential. In order to qualify for special ed, you have to be below grade level. There are a lot of children who have disabilities that are not below grade level, that are actually, in actuality, leading a number of our schools. So what I see this as is giving all those children with disabilities that access. Let the valedictorian get up on the stage. You know, let the valedictorian use the bathroom. You know, as well as the child who has cognitive disabilities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sommerfleck, on that. That being said, Mr. Superintendent, what financial resources does DOE have available to prepare and implement on this ADA compliance bill?
Some of the things that have been mentioned today are accessible within our normal maintenance processes. Other ones will take special projects that we'll have to go out and engineer, and especially building modifications. They have to be engineered and bid out and contracted.
Well, what kind of finances do you have again?
I'm sorry?
So the finances, what do you have right now that's set aside for this type of legislation to make sure that it follows through? Not just the planning part, you know?
No, I'm talking about the doing part.
Right, and how much funding do you have available right now?
Funding that I have for facilities is what we can secure from,
How much is
from
that?
grants right
Yeah.
now.
Yes.
As I looked at the budget bill that passed, we're not at a deficit that we had anticipated, but it's going to be very difficult to program for capital projects because that's where this will fall
Sure,
out.
so how much funding do you have available for this bill?
I don't have an
I
exact
need to
number
know
for
that
you,
number, okay?
but we can get you
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, I think we need to know, you know, where I'm constantly having bills that come up, well, we'll look for the funding, we do have the funding, but they never give us a money amount. And I think we need to find out how much that money is this
Okay.
time around. I mean, how many bills have come before us where we're getting that same excuse? You know, not giving us the money amount. I want to hold you to it, you know? So
Right.
I am hoping you give the chair that figure and also the
No, we
author
can-
of this
we-
legislation, how much money you have set aside, okay?
We can do that, but the first next step we have to have is with the board is to develop a spending plan under the current budget, and we have not done that yet.
Well, I hope that's done real quickly
It's coming
here.
soon.
Yeah, more than soon, like next week, right?
That's right.
By next week. Okay, I'm holding you to that, okay? The other thing is, what kind of strain will this bill, with the 180-day requirement, place on GDOE, you know, team as a whole?
That's going to be tough.
Okay, well, it has to be
My
because...
team is thin, but if this
Yeah.
is passed, then what we have to do, we'll find a way to do it.
Okay, and you
Because
told
we're-
me in a week, we're going to
We're
have some
heavily
figures.
involved in assessing all of our facilities anyway,
Okay.
so this is just one more part of that assessment that we can do at the same time.
You know, I ask these questions, you know, and because I think it's so important. We've been leaving these individuals behind for so long and not moving forward, and I don't think we're going to allow that to happen anymore. So we're going to hold you to the feet to your fire, you know, fire to your feet right now, and you have 1 week. What I'm curious, Ms. Gutierrez, is that you've come in front of this body several times as personal, and you know, you're on your own personal reconnaissance. How come we don't have the board of directors sitting in front of us today and giving us their testimony on what kind of, you know, subgroups that have come together and actually address certain issues within DOE? I know that you have these subgroups, you know, that you put together to go out and do inspections. So how come we don't have the Board of Education in front of us today providing their testimony on what they're doing to address this issue?
Thank you, Senator Tello. When this bill first came out and everybody was given an invitation, an invite, because it didn't go to the board as a whole, and the board will not be meeting until Tuesday, and then, of course, it's on the agenda. But for me, I take it upon myself to come here and on my own, because I know that there's some of this bill that the board members are not all board members are going to support. So I'm just here because I want to let it be known.
So, Ms.
because-
Gutierrez, is it
yeah.
okay to ask you, do you have a subgroup within the Board of Education to address
Yes,
this
there-
issue?
okay,
And
right.
who sits
Yeah.
on that, who
There is a
oversees that?
There's a subcommittee. I am on the budget this year. I'm on the subcommittee for the budget. There is a they call it Safe and Healthy School Committee. That's the facilities and everything.
And that,
that's-
does that address ADD compliance and providing those with disabilities
Well,
the needs that they
it's
need
part
at the school?
of- It involves everything in the school.
And you're sitting on that particular board?
No, we have, you see, we cannot have more than 4 board members. So the
Okay.
subcommittee, the committee on the Safe and Healthy School is Mr. Angel Sablan, Mr. Peter Ada, and Mayor Savares. I believe one of the ex-officio, Mr. Tim Fedenko. So
Well, I
yeah.
ask you, for the sake of time, Ms. Gutierrez, I know my other colleagues have other questions, but for, my last comment is that this bill was introduced in April of this year, quite a bit of time ago, almost five months ago. And it was addressed by the last superintendent when the ADD bill came out. So I'm just surprised that the board hasn't taken the time to address this particular bill. So may I make a suggestion and bring back to your board that they provide testimony and provide us, this body, with what they've been doing to address it and what their plans are. Since they've had this for a while, you said, their plans are moving forward, okay?
Thank you, Senator. And I
Okay.
cannot speak for the former acting superintendent. This is where when we bring these things, it's operational. So it's not sent over to the acting superintendent, even the superintendent, because these people are under facility and maintenance, CIP are under the superintendent.
The board is not under
Yeah,
the
I know that,
superintendent.
Senator, but
no,
you
it's
don't
not.
I know that.
You
but
act
we
on
did.
your own.
That's why there
Yeah.
was no movement. I came here today to testify on my
Yeah,
own.
but you
I don't
came
know
here not
why
as a
Miss-
board
Miss-
member. You came here as an individual person.
I don't know why
I would
Mr.
like
Ada
to
is
see.
not testifying, but I'm testifying
Right.
as
And
a
I
private
appreciate
citizen.
that. And I greatly appreciate that, Ms. Gutierrez, because you have been here, and I have mentioned in that other times you've come here. But I really would like to hear from the board and what they're doing. Because you're, like me, I have 14 other people I have to contend with to get my bills through, and as well as you sitting there, you have other members.
I'll bring it to the board during the
I
board
appreciate
meeting on
that.
Tuesday,
Within a week?
Senator.
Can
If-
you
if
get them
they
to
should
provide
have a
something within a
testimony
week?
by September 30th.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
so much.
Senator.
And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titagui. The Vice Chair, Senator Chris Dwayne.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel and all of your passionate advocacy. Nice to see you here. A lot of great questions have been asked, so I just wanted to put something on the record. Might be some good news for you, Mr. Superintendent, and also to board members. So if you go to the last page of the packet that we have here today, we have the Bureau of Budget Management Research comments on Bill 9837. And in the last paragraph, it says, although Bill 98-37 COR does not provide a specific appropriation to fund such purpose, the bill does provide authorization to GDOE to allocate adequate financial resources to include federal grants like ARP funds and other funding sources. Now, here's the good news, Mr. Superintendent. As such, this could include the recent $20 million appropriation to GDOE for the repair and maintenance of school infrastructure and grounds pursuant to Public Law 37-5. So today it sounds like, Mr. Superintendent, you have a lot of new hope for the $20 million that we've been trying to airmail to you and hand deliver. So you have any comments on that?
Beyond thank you, the only comment I can say is, in the process of using those funds, I don't know why ADA standards haven't been considered all along as just what we do. And I would just assure you from my point of view and my experience throughout my career, so that's why I'm surprised, because I started teaching the same year this law started. And it's always been part of my life, and part of my life as an administrator and a leader in person in charge of design, those sorts of things. So we will utilize those resources, and we'll be able to demonstrate that in the community, but that is going to take quite a bit of work on our facilities. The first step I will do now, I have to go back and review the Simon Sanchez design and be sure that was included. Because when I look at JFK, nope, didn't happen. So that's the first thing I have to do, is look at that design and make sure that those considerations are built in before we go any further.
I appreciate that, Mr. Superintendent, and as I said, it was not only passed in the budget as an amendment to your budget for the $20 million, but now you got BBMR on the record stating that this money obviously still belongs to you because they include it. And so while I know that local funds are precious and to be used as judiciously as possible, because we should maximize federal funds, I think this now gives you leverage that when you go and have your team write, and the board can take this up as well, when you go and write for grants associated with this, you already have your, by the testimony of BBMR, you already have your buy-in from the local government on any matching requirements or things that may come up. So once again, I think we've got some really great news this morning. So much great questions were asked. I just wanted to go back to Mr. Summerfleck real quick, because you mentioned you know, the federal requirements, of course, and, you know, going back to 1990. Do you see this bill essentially as a local codification of what basically is already really our duty and responsibility?
Yes, federal law has supremacy. So the ADA is the law of the territory. By the legislature coming forward and saying, we want to follow the ADA, we want to ensure our schools are ADA compliant, it just puts more local support behind it. But, and I guess this is the twist, is they could now be sued under the ADA in federal court tomorrow. You know, with this local law, without this local law, that doesn't change. What this local law does say is that we care about making our schools compliant for all people. And, you know, ADA or no ADA, this is a step to say that we want all people to be able to use our schools. So do I find it a statement? Yes. Do I find it a requirement for me as a lawyer to go sue DOE over ADA compliance? No. But, and I guess this is the point that I would put forward. If we're waiting for our citizenry to sue because someone's not following the law, our government is broken. You shouldn't have to file a lawsuit in order to say, be compliant. It's the right thing to do. It's what should happen. Why do we need to sue? This law clearly puts forward that we want to know what's wrong, we want to fix what's wrong. Based upon what I've heard Dr. Swanson put forward already, he already knows that he needs to clean up his act. He already knows that for reasons unbeknownst to him, he's in charge of a bunch of schools that don't meet federal law. And he knows that he's now, right now, as he sits here, exposed to multiple lawsuits as regard to multiple schools. But that shouldn't be our standard. It shouldn't be parents have to sue. That shouldn't be where we start from. We should start from, we want to make our schools compliant to everyone. So I don't know if, you know, if I've answered your question, if I've danced around it too much, you know, but does this affect the federal law? No. You know, does this a statement by our local legislature that ADA compliance is important and we want our schools to comply? Yes. Yes, it is that statement.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. I appreciate it. I mean, I'm certainly going to vote for the bill. It makes sense, and it's the right thing to do, as you mentioned. And I'm glad that you put forward that absolutely, I mean, as a community, when we recognize the problem, especially if it's long-standing and we move to address it, then, you know, there should be some consideration to that good faith, at least for a time certain. So I appreciate your perspective. And Mr. Chairman, that's really all I had to add to this process. But I think we're moving in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Dwayne. Senator Quinata.
Thank you, Mr. Chairs. I think my colleagues already exhausted enough questioning and commentary, so I'm just going to keep this short. I just want to thank you guys for your presence. Definitely commend you, Ms. Vanjie, for your comments. Mr. Swanson, I know that it is your mission to get DOE back in check and in order. It's your house, so we expect it to be put back into tip-top shape. Mr. Gutierrez, you've been there a long time, and we know you have a lot of institutional knowledge. Mr. Summerfleck, you've been a pro bono lawyer. You've always protected not only yourself and your son's interests, but the community that you represent, most especially. You represent in a very personal issue, and you know that it's not just affecting you, it affects a fraction of the individuals that need a lot of representation. For most of the time, don't have the ability to represent themselves. So we're not trying to in any way make any laws that are, decepting their inability, but their ability to move forward in life. So with that being said, I thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think we can move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Quinata. Senator Shelton, Senator Sabina Paris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel for your testimony. It's been very helpful this morning. This question goes towards, so first of all, I think, as we're going through, ensuring our schools comply with sanitary regulations, I think, this is kind of like a good timing to also make sure that we're complying with the ADA. So I'm hoping that it doesn't affect procurement, because I know there's some procurement that was sent out, and I'm just wondering, would you have to pull that back and just to kind of regroup and include this in the specifications? So this is for the superintendent.
We wouldn't have to pull it back, and there are 3 different projects, and one of them just closed on bidding, another one closes next week, but we do have to go back and review and make sure that these considerations that are in that scope do meet the ADA requirements. Now, the law already tells us that they're supposed to, but I've got to go back and verify that the language is there to provide that support. Hopefully that won't cause us to have to go back and resubmit, because it's been a long process and we're about ready to move out with this. And there is the issue around the expiration of funds at the end of 24 fiscal year. So we want to be sure we don't miss that deadline.
Yeah, and I know this might require you to do so, because it's a change of the scope of work. I know that a lot of the doors had to be changed, but yeah, I mean, that'd be good if you can maybe get that answer from your legal counsel.
My estimation, and I'm just looking at a review that I did of the plan several weeks ago, classroom doors were not part of the process, that are focused on roofs, walkways, and restrooms. So the restroom accessibility certainly is one that we have to look at. So there might be a follow-on project to go back and do the rest of this.
Okay, thank you for that response. And so the other question I have for you, Superintendent, is I've been warned in the past regarding creating bills for education, because there's this concept of supplant and supplement and supplant. And so, some of the bills that we pass locally basically require now that we have to fund it ourselves. And so I'm just wondering, with your federal group, your federal grants group, if you can go back and check with them and see, what you can, your feedback on the bill, to ensure that we're not losing a good funding source. Because as we hear today, there's federal funds. Once a plan is submitted, that we can possibly get these funds to actually do the work that is needed. So I appreciate if you can look into that and see, or what to your extent, do you know from your own experience, what is that?
The funds that allow us to, right now, that are federal dollars that allow us to go in and do construction work, and repair and maintenance, are in addition to what we would normally have, so they're a supplement. We're not using that instead of the local funds. We marry the two up. So I don't see it as an issue, but we can certainly investigate to be sure in the language of the grant. And ARP is the big one right now that we're looking at.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that, because I know the federal funding for ADA potentially is different from this congressional funding that's coming down.
Right.
That's, has a certain timeline to it. Okay, the other question I have is for, I guess, for the charter schools. So this bill also is for all public schools. And so if you can, I don't know if you said this early in your testimony, but to what extent would the charter schools require funding? Have you done the audits for the schools?
Their charter
schools?
board will have to answer that question for you. Are we really beyond the funds that move from the legislature to them? We don't have any control over that.
Absolutely. Sorry, my attention was to the chair.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, as a matter of fact, with public health, when we had our last, I think, 2 work sessions with Senator San Agustin with regards to the budget bill, and we mentioned, and they asked if the charter schools were in full compliance with public health, and that was a yes. I also went ahead and asked ADA compliance, and the only school that is not, that we are working on is the Guåhan Academy Charter School, because of the building already made that way. So when we have our council meetings there, we do total 100% accommodations, like we have it in the first floor. We even announce it, but that's the only school that is not ADA compliant. But that is fully, the schools, as a matter of fact, with the Mount Carmel, we reminded them that a part of it is the building has to be ADA compliant with any students with disabilities. So I hope that answers your question, Senator.
Okay, so I know it's like 2-story, Mount Carmel's a
Correct.
2-story. Do they
Correct.
have an elevator?
They do have wide enough, I do know they have wide enough doors. When we went down there to put our public notices, I did walk the schools. They do have wide doors. The only disadvantage is because that school was built so long ago, they have the stairs from the front that is rather high, but they can park in the back, and everything from that area is ADA compliant.
Thank you for that response. And then the other schools that the representatives that are not here is it GCC too would be included, as well as UOG? Yeah, so we probably would reach out to them as well, as far as their feedback on this. Okay. Yeah, I think, it's really important that, we promote and advocate inclusivity, right? When it comes to, as a society, whether it's in our laws, in our buildings, and I think, this is I think we're going through a period of time where we're going through almost like an overhaul, a much needed overhaul in regards to our facilities. And I know part of it has to do with funding, right? Funding has been the big issue. And we do have a pot of money now currently. And, it's our responsibility to ensure that these funds are going to where the needs are. And I see this as one of the big needs that we as a body, I think, prioritizes and would like to see it through. So I appreciate everybody's feedback here today, and we definitely would, this is not the last discussion, this can't be the last discussion to ensure that this is implemented. So having said that, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone here.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Senator San Nicolas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. Ms. Gutierrez, you mentioned about that ramp at Maleso. When I was going around this last Christmas, and I was, I used my mobility scooter because some of the distances were far. And if I went down that ramp, like my dad would say, "Makpoy game, kumusulu now," makpo. Yeah, so I do understand. But I'd like to also commend the author for proffering this thing. As a school counselor, I saw and I addressed some of the disability issues through 504, and I can understand. We had to put students in the first floor because the elevators weren't working to the second floor. So, I did that, and also as a school counselor, ma'am, Mrs. Cepeda, thank you for your testimony. You forged my soul and invigorated it once more. I have a lot of faith in you and everything that you said. It takes a lot of courage to say those things, because as a school counselor, I saw, a lot of things that were quite unsavory, and you brought that to light once more, and it takes courage to do that, and at any capacity that you can do that. I encourage you to do so again and again, so that way we can do the things that we need to do and rectify the problems that we do face. And education is so important to our community, and people like you and Mrs. Gutierrez, you know, you bring that to the forefront and keep us informed of those things, and so that way we can make the necessary changes. And I applaud you and I thank you again. Okay. With that, Mr. Chair, I have nothing further.
Thank you, Senator Nicolas. Senator St. Augustine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I'd like to thank also the author for this bill. The only thing I have a problem with is 108 days is a long time. Exactly what Mr. Summerfleck brought up. A plan for a plan. No, I believe that maybe this 108 days, maybe the author will consider it, is that reduces to maybe 90. So that within 180 days, there's action going on. Not the excuse of, oh, we need to get funding. No, no, no. Come up with another excuse. I think we talked about that in the budget. We talked about that in the oversight. There's money in DOE. They just need to put it in the right place. I'm just surprised Superintendent's not here, but you know, you have a board that just does policy. Great, do a policy, but you don't have to demand anything. Good job. I have a bill that's coming up later that's going to address that. But I only believe that exactly what Mr. Summerfleck brought up is that, you know, federal law always supersedes any of our laws. If we have an ADA issue, then just get it fixed. DOE, quit coming up with all the excuses why you can't get it fixed. You know, the bill talks about, like I said, it's a great bill. I just shortened the days. A thorough accessibility audit. Mr. Swanson's been on business, what, 30 days? No, 3 months? But he's also a former principal and I guess somebody in charge in Dodea. And you know, if anyone wants to think about, well, what did he do before? He didn't have to do nothing but just tell them to get it done. Because the federal government just says we need to be in ADA and they just do it. DOE should be in no better, should not be going any other direction, just get it fixed. If you need a walkway, then create a walkway. It can't be that hard. The elevator at the schools, really? There's not like 100 companies on Guam. It's only 2 companies on Guam. Just call them up. Find out what it's going to cost and get it fixed. Because if I'm correct, when the ARP money came in for DOE, it talked about opening schools safe for kids. It also includes fixing bathrooms. So everybody can go in there, to include the kids that need to go in there. To get the elevators fixed. All the reasons for the delays, for me, is unacceptable. And if anybody wants to sue DOE, please do. Teach them a lesson. It's a hard lesson to learn, but it shouldn't have to go to court to get this decided. DOE needs to just do it. 108 days, I believe, is just too long. It's just a plan to plan to plan. You know, it's like going to a meeting and says, okay, I want to go to this meeting because I want to schedule another meeting in relation to the meeting we went to. Cut it out, folks. We're talking about our children. A timeline for addressing errors. Within that 90 days, you should be able to come up with a plan. You take a look at the schools. I was really hoping the superintendent was going to be here because I'm going to ask him, how many schools has he visited in the 3 months he's been here? Because if he hasn't, he's on the phone. Good idea. But I'm concerned is that when I was on the board, and you know, Vanjie remembers this, Ms. Peda and Ms. Gutierrez knows, and even Mr. Ada knows this, we went to every school, and if there was an issue, we addressed it as a governing board. We didn't micromanage. We don't have to micromanage. We just told superintendent, get it fixed. How he did it was up to him. And at the end of the day, the board decides if he's going to keep his job or not. We went through that process, and that what happened to do with when there was 10 schools on the chopping board. One of them was Southern High. And when we felt that every school needed attention, that superintendent at the time preferred just to entertain one. While 9 other schools were in jeopardy of being closed. We turned around and we said, okay, you want to entertain one? We're going to entertain you. And we terminated him. We hired another superintendent. All 9 schools started getting fixed. Because why? The board then was governing and was not doing a policy. It was giving direction that get it fixed. And it took the whole board to tell the superintendent this, not one individual. And I believe that the issue with the ADA is very simple. There's federal money. You don't have to worry about local money's there already. but there's federal money, get it fixed and move on. And if the author was to change this from, I'm going to support the bill as it is, but if you can reduce the number of days, I would be happy with that because detailed specifications for modification, really? You need a ramp. You need to change Mauricio's ramp to a lower slope. You need to just send somebody to go fix the elevator. It's very simple. Gosh, if this was a private company, they'd be worried sick about somebody suing them. They'll just get it fixed within the same week. DOE needs to be in that same attitude and position to say, we need to get it fixed. And that's why I was going to ask the superintendent if he was here, or any of his folks were here, how many schools are not in ADA compliant? Is it all 41? And if it is all 41, shame, shame, shame. And I believe, Mr. Chairman, I do support the bill, and thank you for the time.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. If there's no further comments or testimony, the committee will continue to accept testimony on this bill for 10 days after this hearing, and you could submit written testimony at malfunction@guamlegislature.org. We're going to move around in the schedule a little bit, and we'll now hear discussion on Bill 63-37, sponsored by Senator Joe S. San Augustine, Senator Roy Quinata, Senator Amanda Shelton, Vice Speaker Tina Rose Muña Barnes, Senator Dwayne Nicolas, and Senator William Parkinson. It's an act to add a new Chapter 14 to Division 2, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, and to amend subsection 5008, 2 of Subarticle A, Article 1, Chapter 5, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to authorizing the Guam Department of Education to directly purchase its own solar photovoltaic system. And I will now defer to the Bill 63-37's main sponsor, Senator Joe San Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for hearing the bill. You know, folks, the Guam Consolidated Commission on Utilities is working on building solar energy capacity over 3,000 acres of land, and $1 billion is needed. The CCU, the Guam Power Authority, and local stakeholders are utilizing solar energy technologies to build our island's solar energy capacity. This is in line with our local government's commitment to work towards clean energy production. We've seen the work at Luzon and Marble Cave area. We know of the destruction the once beautiful, pristine Marble Cave used to look like and what it is now. We know how much of those sites are helping our power utility to meet the demands of our residents and businesses during the day. This bill proposes another source for the real estate as rooftops of the different schools versus the acreage that was used for those solar farms. It will eliminate the concerns of the destruction of lands and the environment for future generations. Further, the use of solar energy is economically, as it is. It will provide additional employment with solar energy companies and beneficial as it will help lessen grid outages, lessen energy costs, and encourage students to learn about solar energy and enter career fields that deal with solar energy. While this bill may not address the issues of power load shedding, we've been experiencing the last few months since the storm, it will address high demand for power consumption by the largest consumer of GPA, who is also the largest department of our government. The Guam Department of Education spends anywhere between $12 million to $15 million on electrical utility for all 41 schools. Having those 41 schools equipped with solar technology will lessen the cost of their electrical utility, and allow the schools to use the SAVE fund for repair, maintenance, capital improvements, or hiring of needed faculty and staff. Bill 63 is to authorize the Guam Department of Education to directly purchase its own solar photovoltaic system, which will utilize GDOE and its schools' rooftops, use energy, and ultimately attain a zero-cost energy utility. Please, I just want everybody to understand that I've been reaching to GPA. They're supposed to be working with DOE to get a solar energy on board. And it don't have to, if it don't need to go to a net meeting, don't go to a net meeting. Just leave it for the schools so they can reduce their costs. And if GPA is willing, they can be, if they're involved with DOE, they can make this work. We don't have to be talking about, let's use a bunch of acreage. You have 41 schools, 41 rooftops. They can take control of this and have their footprint. It'll be a GPA and DOE's program. That's what the bill was all intended for, was to get DOE They have a means to get this funded, and it's called Title I, federal grants. They can actually pay for all the solar energy, solar power, and put it on place. And if the CCU feels that this is another source to help the people of Guam, then so be it. But DOE has spent millions, like I said, $12, $15 million a year in just utilities, and we need to figure out a way how to reduce that and redirect that funds to helping repair the schools. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. We'll now hear testimony on the bill. If anybody is going to provide testimony on this measure, please have a seat at the table. I know we have Attorney Fred Arecki, Superintendent Swanson, Alice Chu, and Robert Sun. So please approach the table, and don't forget to state your name and title for the record before you begin your testimony. Attorney Arecki, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Thank you, Chairperson Barnett. Senators, I know most of you well and have worked with you, and I'm pleased to be here this morning. My name is Fred Arecki. I'm the Chief Administrative Law Judge for the Guam Public Utilities Commission, and I'm about to finish my first 15 years working with the Commission. The PUC has submitted testimony, and it does oppose this bill. But I want to give you a little background, lest you might think that the PUC is against net metering, which is not the case at all. The PUC established the net metering program in 2008. It passed Tariff C, which is actually the vehicle through which the net metering program was set up. And it provided compensation to net metering customers at the retail rate. So right now, a net metering customer gets the same rate that GPA charges its customers, which is about 23 cents per kilowatt hour. The PUC has strongly supported net metering, and in fact has not always been in accord with GPA. GPA has made some efforts, I think about 3 over the last number of years, to change the compensation from retail rate to what we call avoided cost or a value of solar. Thus far, the PUC has not been willing to do that, but I think there's a possibility that it may have to consider that in the future. And part of that is because of the potential impact of this bill. So let me try to explain what the real concerns are. Right now, there's about 32 megawatts of net metering power in Guam. This bill potentially could probably double that or more. If we have 41 schools, I don't think we have clear estimates of how much net metering we would be talking about, but it could potentially be in excess of 25 to 30 additional megawatts, and maybe even more. If each school had 2 megawatts in their solar system, that could be as much as 80 megawatts. So the concern is that right now we have a very fragile power system. You know that. We have load shedding. We don't have sufficient load capacity. But the problem with net metering is it's intermittent, it's not consistent, and it could put some great strains on the power system. I think before we do that, we need more of a study. We need to find out exactly what the impact of having all of the schools switching to net metering, what would be the impact on our power system. GPA is currently doing some studies, but it does concern me greatly that such a huge influx of solar power into the island-wide power system could cause a lot of problems that we're not even presently aware of. So I think that should be a prerequisite before this bill would be enacted. Also, the PUC over recent years has come to some opinions that it may be more efficient to accomplish solar energy through utility scale programs. And that's where GPA goes out on bid. It creates a plant, an entire plant, such as the KEPCO plant, which can produce 60 megawatts of solar power. So we certainly would suggest that that be an option considered. And I do note that GPA is setting up a virtual power plant program. I did attach to my testimony the fact that they are including the schools in that. And I have to say, I certainly second Senator San Augustin's recommendation that GPA work with the schools on this issue. But I think it can be done better than through a net metering system. There should be, I think solar, utility scale solar is one idea, and then the virtual net metering too. So before this bill is enacted, I would really ask you to consider the possibility of those other options. Now, of course, in recent testimony, when net metering has come up, the PUC has often said, well, if you implement this, it's going to have to raise power rates. And let me explain that a little bit, why I say that could be a possibility with this bill. The bill says that it will be cost effective because DOE will reduce its power rates. But the problem is DOE is not the only entity involved in this equation. You have GPA, and GPA is a rate-based entity. It funds the power system through its rates. So it's not only a question of will this be cost effective for DOE. With GPA, it seems that this bill could potentially result in a $12 million loss in revenues. That's a big revenue hole. And I think, as you know, the PUC under law is obligated to provide rates that will sustain the utility to meet its obligations. If all the schools go solar and then GPA's rates are reduced by an amount like that, potentially more because there are other bills you're considering like the 500 kilowatt for commercial entities. All these can impact the rates, the revenues that GPA is able to garner. And with a loss of 12 million, I can assure you that the PUC would have no choice but to fill that with rates. So that's why I'm trying to explain that a bill like this has a definite rate impact. It's not only is it cost effective to DOE, but what's going to be the effect of GPA and the ratepayers. And of course the ratepayers, and particularly non-NEM ratepayers, are the ones that bear the burden when the rates are increased because of the solar systems. So I'd really ask that you take that into account. It's worrisome. The PUC never takes any joy, I can assure you, in raising rates. But somebody has to do it. And in the same way, it probably takes a PUC to consider issues such as when should there be a limit on net metering. Now, my testimony in some extent covers the fact that we're not sure that the load capacity provided by the DOE schools will be that useful for the system. The problem is with net metering, to have it effective at the nighttime for the peak load, you need battery storage. Now, will all these school systems have adequate battery storage to provide power at the peak? It's not clear, and the history of experience is that most net metering customers do not have adequate battery storage, either residential or commercial. So that's really a concern. Will this additional net metering energy provide anything that's useful for the power system. I tend to think there are more dangers here. And as I've stated, net metering power is intermittent. It can tend to overburden circuits. It, of course, on days when there's no sun, it doesn't provide power. And it puts a strain on the existing power system. So that is an additional concern. I've talked in the testimony about the independence of the PUC. And of course, the PUC is an independent rate-setting body under the Organic Act. And its role, in fact, is to provide testimony to the legislature. This is mentioned in our enabling law that we should assist the legislature with opinions that we have on power-related issues. Here the question is, what should be the limit of net metering power in Guam's system? The PUC has already, in fact, set a limit in one of our dockets. It used to be under the original tariff that once there were 1,000 net metering customers, the PUC would reevaluate the net metering program. What it did about 2 or 3 years ago was to change the limit from a number of customers to a percentage of the load in the entire system. And in its prior docket, the PUC determined that there should be a limit of 10% of the entire load for net metering. Otherwise, the net metering could cause real problems for the system. At that time, the limit was 26.1 megawatts. GPA has informed us that's already been exceeded. We're up to 32 megawatts now. So the question is, what should the limit be? I think you know that in many states, Hawaii, California, that they have already set restrictions on net metering and limited either the number of systems or the amount of customers. So this is the role of the PUC. But if, on the other hand, the legislature will be continually increasing the amount of net metering production in Guam, it renders any cap that we might set to be useless. And that is a concern. I think, again, we need studies to show what should be the limit of net metering for our system. The final point I brought up relates to the compensation for net metering customers. The PUC has actually been somewhat oppositional or antagonistic to GPA's position. We have for years protected the current compensation rate, retail rate. And the reason for that was to protect the fledgling net metering industry. But again, now we're reaching a point where we really need to question what should the limit of net metering be. And I think that if there's too much more additional capacity through net metering put into the system, the PUC is going to have to consider reducing the rate. I mean, it hurts GPA, it takes their revenues away. And if they don't have the revenues from their customers, they're going to have to impose the burden on other customers, the non-net metering customers. So the reason that the PUC would consider this is to reduce the impact, the loss to GPA from net metering. The PUC hasn't done that yet, but talking to commissioners, I think there could be a time if GPA loses such revenue that it will have to consider changing the rate. So for those reasons, I would urge the legislature to be cautious in its approach on net metering. But I do like the idea, not saying that it shouldn't be done. The rooftops could be useful. But a better approach would be to work with GPA and have GPA do it. I have to say, this would be a daunting task for the schools. I've been hearing this morning about various problems that the schools have. Setting up net metering in all the schools is not going to be easy. It's a daunting task. You got to do the bids, you know, you've got to figure out how to implement the system. GPA can do that. You know, they've already set up successful utility scale plants. It would be, I think, much preferable to have GPA working with DOE. So thank you for the opportunity to present these views. And as I indicated, the PUC would urge you not to enact this provision at the present time. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Harecki. Mrs. Chu, if you could please just state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Speaker and all senators, half a day. My name is Alice Chu. I'm the resident in Guam 45 years. And my business is D&D LED solution. I have a 10 years experience about the LED. And my new item is make the solar panel. And my respective the partner is in China, and they have 35 years about the solar panel, the knowledge. So, excuse me, I didn't prepare enough the material. I cannot say about something detailed, but we just like to offer the most advanced skill, technology, and reasonable price, and typhoon proof for 15 degrees. So later, if we have a chance to hear, then I have the person, they already know about the solar panel. Thank you for your patience. Thank you very much. Thank you, be here. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Robert's son?
Yes, I'm sorry, he has something emergency, sorry.
Thank you. Yes. Superintendent Swanson.
Senators, you have my written testimony, and I'd like to refer to that at this point. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to come before you to provide testimony on Bill 63-37 COR, which authorizes Guam Department of Education to directly purchase solar photovoltaic PV systems. To date, GDOE has utilized $15.8 million to cover the cost of power, an average of $1.4 million per month. Every fiscal year, GDOE comes before this body to request support to fund utility costs at our schools, including $16 million to fund power for fiscal year 2024. In an effort to reduce costs and move toward energy efficiency, GDOE has worked in a collaboration with the Guam Power Authority and Siemens Industry Incorporated through the Bringing Energy Savings to Schools, or BEST program. With these partnerships, GDOE has successfully implemented advanced LED lighting systems at various schools in an initiative that not only reduces electrical demand and consumption costs, but also elevates the quality of lighting in our educational facilities. Additionally, John F. Kennedy High School has taken a significant step towards sustainable energy by installing over 420 solar panels on its gym, cafeteria, and classroom rooftops. The same capacity to house solar panels exists across the public school facilities, which supports the intent of the legislation at hand. Bill 6337 presents the department with an opportunity to increase energy efficiency and significantly reduce utility costs to redirect cost savings toward improving school facilities and providing much needed resources to our public school students and teachers. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the department for the opportunity to provide testimony in support of Bill 63-37, and we are hopeful for its passage. GDOE remains committed to working with the 37th Legislature to serve our island's public school students in creating more sustainable, more energy-efficient school facilities.
Thank you, Superintendent Swanson. Is there anyone else here to provide testimony on this bill? If not, I'll first defer to the bill's primary sponsor, and then we'll go down the line to my colleagues in the order of their arrival. Senator St. Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I understand the testimony provided by PUC, the net metering program. But this is not about net metering. This is about them just loading up with their own solar power. Solar panels, getting batteries, doing whatever they need to do to reduce their cost to utilities. And I understand where the PUC may be concerned with GPA's loss of revenue. But I think GPA needs to be worried about that, period, across this island. Because there's many folks that I know of are equipping themselves with solar panels and getting batteries themselves. And I wouldn't be surprised if many of them are getting ready to say, I'm already saving money, I'm still on the grid, but I'm not using their power all the time because I'm using my own solar panel and my batteries. And if you know, if we listen carefully to Mr. Swanson's statement, they've been working with GPA, with the Simmons industry, in bringing energy savings to schools. They're working with them today. This bill is still, we need to speed it up. I think that's the issue I'm very concerned about. Everything is all about, well, let's do a study. And I understand where Ms. Attorney Reki's come from. Let's do a study. Well, GPA, you should have been doing a study. Because in the past, I've introduced 2 bills to help GPA do what they need to do, build their power plants and so forth. And if they've been watching what's going on in the United States, there's a big push for solar energy. And if GPA wants to take advantage of this, they can work with DOE today and say, DOE, if you can get it, can we work it where they do the net metering in some other form or in whatever direction they want to do it. But the bill doesn't talk about net metering at all. It talks about get your own solar panel, get your own batteries, save yourself $15 to $16 million a year, pay for your maintenance of your buildings. Because the last oversight hearing we had, I think Mr. Swanson, you're looking at reevaluating if you even need the number of schools you have today. You have 41 schools for 24,000 kids. That number may just reduce because when I was on the board 10, 12 years ago, there was 35, close to 36,000 kids. We're already lost 10,000 kids. And we still have 41 schools. We may not need that number of schools. So if GPA is going to be worried about losing customers, you can expect it when DOE starts saying, we don't need even 5 schools or 10 schools. There's nobody going to rent it right away. So there's not going to be drawing any customers for GPA. So GPA should be doing a study exactly on what they got on the island right now. What is going on Guam and what's happening. Actually, maybe reach out to all the solar companies and says, how are you doing on your sales? If you're selling a bunch of solar panels, it's going to impact them. So they can, when they go to the PUC, they can actually give a very good estimate of where they're going. Because I know PUC doesn't want to raise the rate, of course. They don't want to be the bad guys. And even though they said earlier, somebody's got to do it, yes. But at the same token, there's got to be a sense of getting it fixed. Sure, we've been having power outages. It had nothing to do with the net metering. It has something to do with the typhoon. And at the same token, when I asked them about whatever happened to when they canceled the other power plant at PD, they said, because it took too long. Well, you ain't got this one running either yet. And it's costing the people of Guam load shedding. What is it going to be next? They're going to tell PUC, we need to increase the rates because why? Too many people are going to solar, and it hasn't even touched DOE yet. I think we just need to take a look at this, and the bill is only about getting DOE to hopefully go to Title I federal grants and get the federal government to pay for all your solar panels. Be a wash if that works. If not, you end up spending for it. And I'm hoping that because of this bill, GPA is going to say, DOE, let's work together and let's make it work for the people of Guam. And I know DOE is going to say, we'll work it, but we need money for maintenance. We need money to fix our schools. So help us save money Sure, it's going to impact. There's no doubt. With everybody else buying solar panels, GPA, wake up, it's coming. That's the biggest push right now. Solar panels are going to be on people's roofs, and they're just happening left to right. And sure, PUC is going to have to be faced with that decision then, but until it comes to their table, it's something that GPA needs to sit down and understand, or actually agree with what's happening, and maybe adjust the power plant. Adjust what you need to do. Redirect the power, because not only are we talking about you may lose customers, but you're gaining a big customer out of the Marine base. You're going to get a big customer there. And there's going to be homes that are being built. There's going to be more customers. Not everybody's going to go to solar. But folks today, many folks are moving towards the solar. Solar panels, moving towards the battery. And they're getting ready to just get off the grid and says, never mind. I don't have to worry about losing power. I know of several families that had solar panels and battery on their homes. Right after the typhoon, they were powered up 100%. And they haven't, and when GPA finally turned back on, they turned off their panel, so because it's still energizing their battery, and they went back on the grid, and they're working with this. They're working with the system. And I think it's a matter of GPA needs to come to the table and understand where DOE is directing. DOE is heading towards solar. And if they can get there, great. If they can't, they'll continue to paying the power bill until they can get to that point where they can save money. And with that, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. Senator Tello-Taitigui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, modernizing our schools, public schools, and getting on board with solar energy production to cut down on utility costs is something I fully support. But, you know, really, is DOE and the government of Guam prepared to currently take a position on the issues that they have in front of them, you know, let alone taking on something that's so complex? Because there are some issues that I'm concerned with, you know. I mean, I'm all into providing a cleaner energy on the island, and most especially sustainable. But, you know, the concerns I have is like the high initial cost for doing this, the energy production, intermediate energy production, you know, is a concern. You know, you have the clouds coming on, you don't have that power. The maintenance cost, you know, we always feel that there's, you know, we have these great projects, we fund the project, but we fail on many times. The maintenance charges involved in that, that's a big one. The complexity of integration is a concern, environmental concerns, technology evaluation, financing and ownership responsibilities. These are huge topics of concerns, you know, going forward onto this. But, you know, I mean, but it doesn't mean that we can stop at moving forward to new technology and finding ways of innovative ways. But my greatest concern is the cost that's going to implement and the maintenance in it. Other than that, you know, I heard PUC's position and your concerns. Many of that is probably have to be with the intermediate energy production. You know, when you have clouds coming over, the not ability for the batteries to take on full energy. And so, you know, that being said, there's more to the study of this and how we can move forward. But with all the issues that DOE is having right now, putting this on their plate right now, it's a big project. Don't you think, Mr. Superintendent? I mean, I'm already giving you a hard time about ADD, and you're still working on trying to repair our schools and come in compliance by next year, you know, 24. And this is just another, you know, to tag on to it. So, I mean, how do you feel, truly feel? I know you support it. We all support clean energy. We all support, you know, cutting down in costs. But how do you truly feel about taking on a task like this right now?
In the short term, that's going to be a challenge. But in the long-term solution, I think that is a viable way to go. I have had some conversations from the folks from Department of Interior that have grant programs to fund this kind of work. When that conversation took place about 6 weeks ago, that was, let's say, a long way from my horizon. But I'd like to go back and revisit that. It will take a lot of thought and engineering and work on how to make a system that is beneficial to the department and works well overall, and I agree with you on the maintenance question. So there's a couple of configurations that, as I understand them, that might work more effectively with a lesser maintenance requirement, but that still has to be investigated. But in general, we would support this. If I can cut that $16 million in half on power bills.
Yeah, but you would have to have the initial cost
I
coming
know
up.
there's an upfront, that's what the federal grant side of it is for, so I need to look deeper into that because, but at the same time, we have more pressing issues.
Right.
And that's why I had to leave, and I apologize. I had to be in a Zoom meeting with the AG on one of these issues.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, we have the maintenance and repair projects that are already in the pipeline to get accomplished, and that should put my rooftops in a good enough condition to be able to support this kind of a project. So that's something else to consider, but it's going to have to be a couple of years down the road.
Right.
But I do want to get us to the point, because we have those rooftops, I agree with it philosophically, we could gather a lot of energy at little to no cost once it's established, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah, and hopefully by then, new technology, comes into play that it's less costly, less in maintenance, and definitely square footage is smaller. We're starting to see more solar panels that are now flexible and can be placed on side of the walls and not just on the top of one, So thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Taitigui. Vice Chair, Senator Chris Dueñas.
Sí, just Masi, Mr. Chairman, and certainly appreciate the panel's presentation. I think there's a balance of discussion here. And Fred, I think that, first of all, I didn't see a signature page. I just wanted to get on the record that this is the testimony of the entire PUC.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I can understand the concerns. I'm more, I don't want to say I'm not concerned, but I'm more thinking that the issue of revenue is something that can be worked out. I think the issue here, and maybe the PUC has been discussing this, is that it may be just a timing issue and a little bit before its time, because this is basically utility grade solar in terms of the quantity, and that's what you seem to be enumerating here. But yet we're moving towards what our new power plant is supposed to be able to take that into consideration in terms of levelizing that power, in terms of how the grid interacts, avoided costs on fuel and the like. So I think that it's just going to require some additional conversation, because it seems almost inevitable that the sensibility of this is on the right track, and the ability to possibly capture the savings, if Mr. Swanson is talking about the ability to avail of federal dollars, which would be no cost, or maybe a minor cost to GDOE. So I want to continue to listen to the argument on both sides of this, but where I'm seeing what you're saying is more of an issue of the current stability of the power grid, the current ability of it to manage those multiple locations of input and output of fluctuating solar power, as well as what it overall means to the integration of the grid. But I think that in the long run, I really would like to see, and I don't know if the PUC is a facilitator for this, but I think there just needs to be some stronger communication and collaboration, because you mentioned in your testimony, and this is where I wanted to go, that GPA on this kind of scale should be basically a partner of GDOE, and like the superintendent said, if I'm not going to get the whole 12, 13 million in savings, but it's a collaborative effort where the engineering and everything else is integrated from GPA working with GDOE, and they have an avoided cost of 8 million or 6 million. It's still a major savings and a major opportunity in terms of between the two organizations. Can you see that?
Well, as I said, I support them working together. My understanding is that GPA and the school system have been working together quite collaboratively in the BEST program that Mr. Swanson mentioned. And we know from the PUC side that actually we approved the use of bond savings so that GPA could provide energy-saving programs to the schools. So I think that is a good approach. But I also think with regard to the rooftop solar, I still feel rather than a system under which the schools just do their own net metering system, that a much better approach would be a collaborative approach where GPA and the schools consider some kind of consolidated program where all the rooftops could be used, and that it would be more in the nature of a something that GPA would be running, more like a utility scale solar project rather than net metering, and then perhaps give GDOE some kind of a preferred utility rate. And there have been other programs like this. I know a number of years ago, GPA did one with GCC. I think one of their solar projects was a joint project. So that's the problem I saw with the bill. I didn't really see any mention of GPA involvement. And I still think with regard to cost issues that Senator Titagui mentioned, maintenance, management, the school system's going to be a lot better off if it works together with GPA, and in fact even has GPA perhaps leading the project and its implementation, because GPA's got all the knowledge, and the educational system is good for educating, but frankly, without a lot of engineers and people that can bid the system, implement it, again, they're going to have a tremendous burden. So GPA really is I think, much better suited to manage the program than GDOE.
Yeah, I just wanted to see, I was eliciting that because it seemed that that was almost inherent in your testimony. So I'm going to continue to monitor, because I think in the end, even at that level, GPA is, I mean, going to have to do what they're doing now. If they did it with a partnership, it would be the difference of GDOE going out and doing bidding and bid specs and working with contractors, because I'm sure GPA would be doing the same thing if they partnered with and decided to try to take this utility scale to that level, because you would envision that they would contract something like this, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, the idea is definitely has a lot of merit, but I do see some of the concerns that you bring up, and we're just going to follow the bill through its progress. But I hope John B. will take a time to circle around and come and sit with you again and go over the plans that they've already done in terms of their evaluation of your overall system, and then maybe put something on the table that still can be workable. That's where I'm at on this position, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Fred,
for Senator.
Your presentation.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Senator Paris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I agree with the author of this bill that, you know, the schools are really a prime candidate for the placement of solar panels. You know, it just makes a lot of sense because, you know, they generally operate during the daytime, and that's when the solar energy is converted, right? Solar power, or the sun power is converted to solar energy. And then at night, generally, these schools are vacated. So it seems like a great site for having solar panels. I do agree also with the PUC that we have to work together. I feel that it's important to work together with the major stakeholders to ensure that rates are not increased for everybody, because, you know, otherwise we're dealing with the haves and the have-nots, right? The people that can, or the entities that can afford these solar panels, now the cost of the overhead of the power grid is now placed more heavily on those that cannot pay for solar panels. So I think, there has to be all stakeholders coming together and really working towards a solution to get towards 100% renewable energy. So yeah, I think these are all good points. I think further work needs to be done. In regards to your wish, Superintendent Swanson, you wish that you can cut your power bill in half. You can do that without solar panels because in the 35th Guam legislature, we passed a bill requiring the Guam Tropical Energy Code to be included in the in the construction of buildings. And so the Guam Tropical Energy Code was something that was created in the early 2000s, but it didn't get passed until the 35th Guam legislature. And so conservatively, if a developer were to implement GTEC, you can reduce your power bill in half. And what that entails is that the building would have to have proper insulation, so roofing, windows, glazed, good weather strips around the openings, as well as high efficiency appliances and also regulation, so automatic regulation of how energy is used in a building. And just simply implementing that can reduce energy consumption by half. And in even my own calculations, it can reduce it as high as 70%. So without solar panels, I think that is really critical to implement first before you purchase solar panels, because that could inform the amount of solar panels that you need to supply a building. Because if you don't implement these conservation measures, so this is the part that I guess doesn't get brought up a lot, but it's really critical to implement those things first. Otherwise, you end up paying more for solar panels when you probably didn't need it to begin you didn't need as much to begin with. So yeah, if I can just kind of bring your attention to that, this is something that our legislature has passed. And the other thing that this legislature has passed is the virtual power plant program, which Judge Hideki had mentioned earlier. And so I can totally see that this bill can be somehow worked into that, if the author is amenable to that perhaps this VPP program, or VPP program, so can DOE, I guess maybe the question for you, Superintendent, because if you take a look, maybe you need more time to take a look, but there is Public Law 36137. And so in this law, it allows for developers, right? Developers to create the virtual power plant program in collaboration with GPA. And so I'm just looking at this, and are you amenable to working with GPA to create this program so that DOE can see the benefits of lower power bills and also protecting our environment as well?
Yes, we'd be amenable to it. I certainly have to do more research on it to understand it better.
Okay, yeah, I think...
I would like to point out, as it occurred to me yesterday, that virtually all of our buildings are uninsulated solid concrete. And once they heat up, it's a tremendous load on the system. And so the points you made about what's available if we follow those design probabilities is, and I've seen the difference in other buildings that do have thermal barriers on them that we do not have. It makes a huge difference.
Okay, great. And do you know how much power GDOE currently uses a year?
In terms of kilowatts, I couldn't tell you. The last year's power consumption was $11.3 million.
Okay, and do you know in your procurement if you included GTEC measures, Guam Tropical Energy Code conservation measures?
I don't believe it did. I'm not sure. I'll have to check.
Yeah, because that's required by law. So, yeah, I hope you can look back at that. Okay, I think, question for Mr. Hideki. So in regards to net metering, you were saying that there have been changes, is that correct, to the program?
Yes, the change a couple of years ago was amending Tariff C to provide that net metering cap of 26.1 megawatts.
Okay,
That was the change. Before that, the tariff provided that once there were 1,000 net metering customers, the PUC would reevaluate the program. But that was amended to change it to establishing a cap of 26.1%, which has already been exceeded.
Okay. Were there any other changes in regards to what you were saying about avoided costs, so like reducing the reimbursement?
No, not to this time. There have been, I will say, 2 or 3 efforts by GPA to amend the net metering tariff to change the compensation from full retail rate to avoided cost or value of solar, but the PUC has not agreed to go along with that. There was one other change, which was it used to be that if a net metering customer produced more capacity than they use, they could kind of gather the credits up, and at the end of the year, they could either decide to carry those over to the next year or get compensation from GPA. And the PUC did change that to kind of delete the compensation for excess generation. Still, whatever generation they use, you know, GPA gives the retail rate, but providing compensation for the excess rate was another kind of revenue distractor from GPA. I mean, it took revenues away to pay for the excess capacity. And then the thought was that some people are building larger systems than they actually need for their homes in order to get excess payment by GPA. So that was another change.
Okay, and I guess in your understanding, is it worthwhile to reform the net metering as well as keep the virtual power plant program available to get towards more renewable within Guam?
Well, I know with the virtual net metering program, the PUC did support the passage of that bill. So I think it's definitely a good idea. I have to say, I mean, my preference is towards approaches where GPA is really undertaking a lot more of the work. So I like utility scale solar plants and the virtual plants. The problem with net metering, it's a little less controlled. It doesn't necessarily have the battery storage. GPA now, for any solar utility scale plant it carries out, it's demanding that there be sufficient battery storage to provide some load capacity at night. That's where GPA is really running into the problem now, of course, the load at night. So I think those are preferred, probably.
Thank you. We're hearing about smart growth, where you have battery storage, so whatever excess energy is created by solar panels, that battery can then run cities, right? And even we're hearing about cars. Electric cars can be plugged into your home, and that could be your source of energy. So, I mean, I think that, yeah, it's important to get everybody at the table when we're talking about energy distribution, production here on Guam. And I look forward to further conversation on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Paris. Before I turn it over to the primary sponsor, I did have a question for Attorney Harecki. If we added to the bill a 2-hour minimum battery storage requirement, do you feel that that would give the grid the stability it needs?
Well, I can't say totally. I think it would help. It would certainly help. Yes, yes, definitely that would help, because then the capacity would probably be more useful, but you still have some of those intermittency overload problems. So I couldn't say that would entirely cure them, but it would help.
Thank you, sir. I commend the author for introducing this bill. Of course, I thank you all for your testimony. I know where Senator St. Augustine's coming from. We just got through the budget session, and every year we hear GDOE ask for, over $10 million to keep the lights on. And so any effort to bring that number down, I mean, in a perfect scenario, bringing it down to zero so that that money that you're using to pay the power bill can be used in the classroom where it's really, most needed. And that being said, with all the challenges, of course, that GPA is facing now with the load shedding, I understand that the need to move to solar even quicker. And I know that GPA has been given many opportunities to work with GDOE. I know that members of this committee maybe aren't as satisfied with the forward progress on that, and I think that was also part of the motivation for the introduction of this bill. That being said, I was kind of thinking about what Senator Perez was talking about in reducing power consumption. I was up at UPI Elementary School yesterday, and we have kids who are sitting in classrooms without air condition, with the lights off, because the teachers say it's too hot in the classroom with no AC to cut the lights on. And so it's a terrible situation. But I'm not sure how much we're saving on the power, because at the same time they've got 3-4 fans running. And I'm sure you're aware of that, Superintendent, because I know you were up at UPI this week. But again, I commend the author, and any effort we can to migrate towards solar. I think it behooves the government, not necessarily, I mean, also, of course, for the cost savings, but because when we hear about GDOE spending $11 million on power, I think that this committee and this body is obligated to do whatever we can to facilitate bringing that number down, so that, again, we have more dollars going into the classroom to benefit the students, and not necessarily going over to meet GPA's bottom line. So I totally understand your concerns, Attorney Jarecki, and I want to be very mindful in how we move forward with this proposal. But that being said, again, I understand the impetus for its introduction and why it looks like we're running downhill in this, because I've heard you in previous testimony provided to this legislature, not necessarily this 37th legislature, but we've kind of heard the same things about GPA is going to work with GDOE, and I think outside of replacing regular lights with LED, we haven't really seen, at least for this committee, that forward movement that's at a level that's satisfactory for all of us. So, and now this time I'd like to turn it over to Senator San Agustin to close on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, you mentioned it, the LED lights is the only thing GPA has ever provided any assistance to DOE. But with that, I just ask for my colleagues, as we move forward, we'll take a look at your testimony, but at the same token, there's more customers coming. If DOE shuts down half of the number of schools, you're going to lose those customers anyway. So I think GPA, what they need to do is get with DOE, work with whatever you need, do whatever you need to do, because with this bill, we're moving to solar energy. We're going to move on it, and don't be surprised if more customers start lining up. And I know where you come from on PUC, but GPA, that's reality. If GPA is going to build any more solar farms, hey, well, there's schools that can be turned to a solar farm. And it doesn't hurt the kids, it'll save the Department of Education some funding. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. If there's no further testimony on this measure, we'll conclude a testimony. Of course, you can still submit written testimony to the committee, and I'll provide the email address at the close of the hearing. And again, we're moving around in the schedule a little bit, and we'll now get to probably the reason why most of you are here today is another bill from Senator San Agustin, Bill number 117-37. This is, of course, sponsored by Senator Joe San Agustin, Senator Roy Quinata, Senator Dwayne, Nicolas, Senator William Parkinson, and Vice Speaker Tina Rose Muña Barnes. It is an act to amend subsection 3102.1 of Chapter 3, Title 7, Guam Code Annotated, relative to the duties of the Guam Education Board. And I now defer to the bill's main sponsor, Senator San Agustin, for his opening statement. Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for hearing this bill, Bill 117-37. The Guam Department of Education Board has served in different capacities as a governing board and policy board for decades. In 2003, DOE was placed on a high-risk designation with a third-party fiduciary agent. And as a matter of fact, I think Mr. Ada and Ms. Gutierrez was on the board when I was on the board. the most recent reorganization of the Guam Education Board to a policy board in 2011 continues to see the department facing issues of operation, federal grants, and capital improvement projects to include repair and maintenance. And the board doesn't play a role other than write a policy. By statute, the board is to be responsible for all policies that govern the Department of Education, meaning that the board approves the policies and budget appropriations of the department, but does not have the power to interfere with the affairs of the department. You know, the only thing I've seen in the 4 terms I have as a senator is that the board comes forward with their approved budget, but then when they go back after the budget bill is passed, they don't play a role after that. I don't know how they seem to manage that. Bill 117 would allow the Guam Education Board to supervise, not to interfere in all aspects of the department through the superintendent, as it would be a governing board to ensure the department meets its goals, to provide adequate public education to every child in Guam. My colleagues and fellow board members, when I was on the board, we were a governing board. We never micromanaged. And if the threat is there to micromanage, then shame on you. You need to police yourselves within that board. Bill 117 will give the elected school board the true oversight of the function and operation of the school system that serves the constituents they were elected by. To fulfill the laws they must uphold. When we come to hearings, when we have hearings on Department of Education, it's only the superintendent shows up, because he's the only one that appears to be accountable. And I'm asking that all elected officials in the Board of Education show up and start participating, start knowing what's going on. And Mr. Chair, thank you for hearing this bill, as it will provide additional support for our education department to reach the goals of a successful school year for our children. Sizus Masi.
Thank you very much, Senator San Agustin. Would all those providing testimony on this bill please approach the table? I know Superintendent Swanson, he left? Okay, well, I think he will be submitting a written testimony. We'll go ahead and start with Mr. Atta in the order of the sign-in sheet. If you have testimony to provide, please, sir, state your name and title into the record and then proceed.
Buenos, Senator Barnett, Senator San Agustin, Senator Titegui, Senator Perez, and Senator Nicolas. My name is Peter Alexis Atta, the longest 42-year appointed and elected member of the Board of Education. Let me preface by saying I am not here to speak for the Board of Education. I am here as an individual board member. I kind of glanced over Bill number 11737, which would reorganize the duties of the Board of Education. I'll make my presentation brief, short, and right to the point. Looking at the time, your stomachs are probably mumbling. I prayed over this legislation. This legislation is extremely dangerous. Then why have principals? Why have division heads, deputies, and superintendent? I can foresee that the very same support staff, teachers, supervisors, assistant principals, deputies, and superintendent would be frustrated that they aren't able to do their work as a result of interference and feeling intimidated. If this legislation becomes law, it is possible that someone may use their influence to have someone hired, promoted, removed from their current position, to which, to me, is a lightning red flag. Currently, if anyone has a problem, there is a protocol to follow. Even if it is presented before the board, Normally, it is referred to the superintendent to address the concern. Bill number 117 becomes law. There will be no need for a superintendent. During the 2022 election, for the first time, the voters had a chance to choose from 9 candidates. If this legislation becomes an operational board, this would require elected officials to be physically present more than not. I doubt that you will find anyone who would be willing to serve. Let me assure you, there would be a conflict. It wouldn't surprise me for many complaints will be filed with the Civil Service Commission. They would need to be a DOE just about on a daily basis. Not too many people have that time. The board currently has only 1 employee, and that is the superintendent. Undoubtedly, I cannot deny that the department has numerous problems, but interfering to the point of intimidation just makes it to the problem, just adds to the problem. Let the chain of command do their work and responsibility. That is why they were hired and paid for. Don Kuluna si Juus Maasi, con respeto, Peter Alexis Ada.
Thank you, Mr. Ada. Mrs. Gutierrez?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator Tello, Senator Perez, Senator Dwayne, Senator Barnett, Senator Agustin, Senator Roy, for still hanging on. Sizus Masi. My name is Maria Atali Gutierrez. I am a private citizen, a resident of Tamuning. I'm here to testify on my behalf. The board did have, the committee on the board did have a work session 2 days ago by Zoom. And of course, in subcommittee, you can only have no more than 4 because of quorum. There was discussion. I already know, even when this bill came, that were board members lobbying, do not approve, do not pass, do not pass. Well, everybody's entitled to their prerogative. So the board on Tuesday will bring the recommendation, the discussion during the work session to the board as a whole. And then from there, they can, take a position whether they'll be in support or not. I hear when people say, and let me just give you back, I'm known to be a historian on the board. August 25th, 2010, Public Law 3183 reorganized the Guam Education Policy Board. Senator Tello, you were on with this legislature. You're one of the sponsors of Bill 424-30 that reorganized the Guam Education Policy Board, and that's the board that Senator Agustin and I were, and even Mr. Ada, back to Guam Education Board. And it describes the duties of the board. The governance of the Department of Education is vested in an education board to be known as the Guam Education Board. So the policy is removed, which people even board members keep saying, policy board. No, it's Guam Education Board, okay? The board shall be composed of 9 members. Duties of the board, 3102.1, the Education Board shall have general supervision over the Department of Education and the control of the funding as prescribed by the law. The board shall have the authority to delegate. Then it goes on to the meeting. 8 months later, August 18, 2011, a bill was introduced, Bill 32-31. Senator Tello, you're not on that. I just want to make sure because I saw her name on the video, right? And when I look at the authors, I know the history of this, and I think Senator San Agustin also know something happened there. Somebody was afraid that they might be removed as superintendent. So the bill was introduced to Public Law 3119, effective April 18, 2011. And it changed. Just 8 months later, the board, education board, shall be responsible for all policies that govern the Department of Education. So I know the history behind this, and Senator San Agustin will know why. I'm hearing that somebody's going to be hired, there will be, operation, and when you see this operation, this is where it is. And I know that when we had a work session, a round table on the GW, and I appreciate, and I don't mind being scolded for doing my job. Well, you had the superintendent. You gave him high number in evaluation. Remember, there are 9 people. I may give him a 2 rating, but the rest give him 5. Of course, my 2 won, right? So it becomes to the above satisfactory. I think people are mistaken that the board is going to be telling the superintendent who to hire and who not to hire. That's not the intention of this. This is not the intention. And when this lawsuit came, 2 of us on the board said, we're not going to fight that lawsuit because it's true. The remaining, they're asking me, I don't know, but I'm not fighting the lawsuit. I was one of the 2 board members to testify during that hearing last week that was continued. What is the fear? What is the fear? What is the danger? Yes, I admit that we didn't really, as a board, hold that former superintendent accountable. But remember, there's 5 members, and I can be the one member that will not support, but I'm useless. So I'm here to support the bill. I'm not asking the senators to put here that the board shall be responsible, oversee the hiring and the firing. No. I look at where it says here, the operation. I read an email this morning from a parent that I referred to the division, the leadership of the school. Nothing happened. Yesterday I got a call from a parent. My child is being charged $15 to be in the band. I was a chair. I was very firm in the facility maintenance. We have work session. We sat down with the people. They went to the grass cutting. I hear board members, oh yeah, past the school, and that grass is very tall. Well, go in and help and cut the grass. If we're going to adjust as board, come to the meeting for 2.5 hours and earn our $250 stipend. I donate my stipend to the students, to the school club. And I'm sure, I don't know, Senator San Agustin and Senator Tello, are the charter school board of, their board of trustee or board of directors getting stipend? So if they're not, remove the Board of Education too. I tried one time when it was really short. It's a funding that says, I said, why don't we forego our stipend? Let it go back to the schools. Somebody said, oh no, it's in the law. We have to earn it. We have to earn it. Someone suggested maybe we should be like CCU, $1,000 as are you in this, on the board to earn money. I don't know what's the fear. And I know the board is not going to be unanimous on this. Because as soon as Senator Agustin put this out, there's already lobbying outside here. Don't, you know, Senator, I don't mind be holding accountable. And I don't mind being chastised by the parents. What are you doing, Maria Gutierrez? The restroom faucet at Agustin fell down on a student. That's operational, right? But who gets blamed? Who gets the lawsuit? The board. I even told the Attorney General, can you include those people that are implementing too? I don't mind being so, if I'm doing my job as a board member. I shouldn't be scared. I'm not here to micromanage. But when it goes to the department and no response, of course. I'm not going to sit at that meeting because I heard, oh, the superintendent cannot have 6 people, 6 boss. Well, sorry. They missed 3 because 9. So I'm going to sit in the meeting and not say what I get from parents. I go to the schools. Oh, you shouldn't be going to the school and to tell people what to do. Well, when I went to Southern High School, the urinal in the boys' restroom is not white anymore, it's brown. Will I keep quiet on that? No, because it's not safe for the kids. I go out there not to tell people what to do. You know, they're very happy when they see me. Hi, Mrs. G. Man, you're the only one we have seen so far. Some of them don't even know who are the board members. We stopped having our meeting at the schools. You know why? Some board members don't know where the schools are located. I know that, you know, people say, oh, you know, if this is passed, Maria Gutierrez is going to have power over the DOE. No. Huh? Who knows? I might not run again. My kid said, Mom, you're getting to be 80. Step down. Let others do it. No. If I can still do it, because I have great grandkids. And they just happen to be entering Head Start. It's not about trying to tell the Supreme what to do. Well, I'll tell you guys, it's, you know, if I'm going to sit there and the whole 2 hours and keep quiet. When Superintendent Fernandez was still here, I told him, John, if I'm quiet during the board meeting, please check, because I'm sick. But you're not going to make me keep quiet, because I look at his report, I prepare my question. Because I'm not going to be a board member to say, roll call, present, Gaigizo, vote, yes, no. And you saw the resolution, Senator Barnett, about the trying to get the 37-4, repeal, extended and everything. I did not vote. Because I know if that is removed, they're gonna travel like that. That's why I take my position. I'm not gonna be persuaded when I know it's not right. So I'm not, whether this bill goes through, I know, they say, oh, it's controversial. It's gonna be controversial, okay. But put something in here if you want to hold the board accountable, because I am going to introduce, and just to let my colleagues know if they're listening, and maybe introduce and add into this bill self-evaluation of board members. What did they do during their term? And let it be public, put it out to the public so we know. The 12 months that we sit on that board, what have we done at the board meeting or special meeting? And I don't mind if, Senator, you add in, remove all the stipend for the Guam Education Board. Because we're not there here to, I'm not in here to make money. I'm here for the kids. Like I say, when the Beneventi school was vandalized, the robotic room, I recommended, how can we donate our stipend? Somebody said, just ask them for the list so we can buy. No. And you know, Senator Dwayne, I've come to your school. That school too is very, I had somebody that told me, take care of that school. And that's my late sister, Anita. Please make sure that school is taken care of. So, to say that, oh, you know, this, no. The board is being sued. But did we have a role in that, on that issue that was on that lawsuit? No, but I accept because it's true, because I saw it. I know it. That parent was here. That parent has been complaining about the daughter since PC Lujan. Now she's in a middle school. I reported, nothing happened. Nothing happened. And it's, you know, so to me, yes, I'm going to, well, the contract says self-appraisal quarterly, due October 1st, 2023, then quarterly. Maybe senators, you should ask for a copy from the board for you guys to be provided. But when I watch you guys, when I watch all of you during the oversight hearing, I said, good, now all of you have frustration. Especially those of you that gave them on the law, your bill, and then you gave them opportunity to take, you know, work. What did they do? They went from 3 schools per week inspection to 1 school per week. I thought they would move faster. Some schools are still waiting. They didn't call me, Mrs. G, do you know when we're going to get inspected? No. Inspection, I asked, can I get an inspection report so we can see what are the deficiencies, what are the demerits? No, we didn't see anything. People that don't go out to the schools to meet the principals, the teachers, the parents, the workers, the students, they don't really know what's going on. I don't go to the school to tell them. They'll walk in and say, hey, Mrs. G, our restroom is clean. Don't clean the restroom for me. That's why you were asked, did Senator Barnett, did you tell downtown that you're coming? We don't have, you're all elected officials. And I'm going to sit at the meeting and just earn the money and not do anything because I don't want to, it's micromanaging, it's operational. I'm tired of that operational because this is what happened. I have bring issues up. And nothing. And nothing. I'm not going to wait to the 1-year evaluation to evaluate an employee. I know the superintendent is the only employee we have. I know that. But we're going to hold everybody accountable. You have heard the previous 2 acting superintendents, they'll hold people accountable. They didn't hold anybody accountable. And for sure, I'm just saying the truth. They didn't hold anybody accountable because if they had held people accountable, we have no role in the federal funding. We don't have a role in any. Senators, do you know that they purchased 41 washer and dryer? And still in the boxes? How do I know that? Because they told me, Mrs. G, check. What are you going to do with washer and dryer? Oh, because during COVID, if the parents want to wash their uniform, kids' uniform, because they're mandatory to wear uniform, they go to this car wash. Francis Santos said, Maria, because you're the only one that if I tell, you're really going to get hyper. Do you know that DOE has trash bag, the black one, that's going to last them for the next 10 years? I asked him, where is it? He said, I'll take you and I'll show you. He showed me. So now if you go to a school, Center Barnett, go into the restroom, because you're going to see all those broken toilet bowl and sing, rap with the... Senator Tello, I heard you about the female hygiene. I heard, I was watching you guys at the session, you were asking about the feminine hygiene, right? Female hygiene. When they order, and somebody sent me the message, tell Senator Tello, feminine hygiene is not just the Kotex, the ding, right, pat. How they order this feminine hygiene is a box inside shampoo, deodorant, toothbrush, toothpaste. So I was at a school, I was sitting there, because the principal said, Mrs. G, the kids are going to enter 10, can you come? I said, sure. And I saw these boxes being pushed in. I saw adult, female adult, male adult. I said, maybe that's the face mask. So I asked the AA, I said, hey, what's in your box? I said, let me check, we don't know. They opened. That shampoo, deodorant, Old Spice, by the way, underarm, toothbrush, toothpaste. Toothpaste is adult size. So I asked downtown, I said, hey, I asked the principal, what is this for? I said, I don't know. They said, give it to the indigent families. I said, indigent? Yeah, that's what they told us. Give it to the indigent family. How do you describe an indigent family? And then look at the tooth. I asked the principal, would you buy your child, your little kid, this size toothbrush? He said, no, this is for adults. So it's still sitting in the warehouse. I think that's what Senator Barnett you saw in the picture. Yes, the nurses are buying their own feminine hygiene at the school if they run out. So, but am I going to keep quiet about that? They come and tell me. How would I know? Is that micromanaging because I know all these things? I know the hot wash and dryer that have not been hooked up. I told Superintendent Swansea when he came in, check with the Typhoon Marmar flu. Took them with as they go towards Rhoda. That's not micromanaging. Sharing the concern of the public. Because the public also put, hey, what is the board doing? What are they doing? Why are they, So put this in. You don't have, just make sure, do not, they're not to be involved in any hiring. Because it's very clear, we don't. We don't even know who are being interviewed. Because that's not our, that's the superintendent. Because that's the superintendent who's going to do the evaluation, not the board. But when people are so scared, board members are, we're going to, this danger, I'm sorry. Because I know when Senator Quinata was a student at Simon Sanchez, we are the same board member at that time. I don't know who he sees go there to his school all the time. But I sure go into the restroom. Because I want to make sure. I hear this morning about maybe a student will not use the restroom during school hours. Yes, there's a mayor that said her son will not use the restroom when he was going to school until he goes home because he said he was so dirty. So this thing about no micromanaging, that it be a lot of report, no. Principals, employees, staff, and even you, Senator Barnett, I will get a message, Senator Barnett was here. He said, look if he's checking the rats. But they're happy. But if you're a board member and you're on the Guam Education Board, and you're gonna just sit and wait for, and stay at the meeting up in Tijan, and not go to the school. It's so sad, because you're not really taking your responsibility when you run for election. And people don't want me next time around. I'm happy. I'm really ready to retire. I don't go out there when I'm running for the board to Mortai to get my petition signed or to birthday party. No. I just wait for people to say, give me your petition. If you make it, I said, if I make it, good. If I don't make it, I'm still good. But even if I don't come back to the board, I will be volunteer in education because there's a policy, and I'll be at the school. But for board members not to go to the school and finish the 2-year term, or 1 year or 3-year term, shame on them. And I'm not trying to put everybody in the thing, but it really bothers me. Because when I say something, oh, it's operational. Well, look where we are. So thank you, Senator, and I leave it up to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Gutierrez. I'm now going to defer to the bill's prime sponsor for any questions, comments, or concerns, and then we'll turn it over to the colleagues. Senator San Agustin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to Mr. Uncle Pete. We were on the board together. You were the chairman, and then I was the vice, and then I became the chairman, correct? And we were governing board, correct? We were governing board then.
It's been so many years, I even forget which was it, but I think you're right, yeah.
Yes, we were, Mr. Ada. And at that time, there was no call for anybody asking for there was interference or micromanaging, and you know that, because we worked with the superintendent, and you were even part of the board when we terminated him, because the Southern High was a crisis. I'm just looking at your testimony, and I understand where you're coming from. Red flag, I don't see any red flag. The only red flag I see is, and I'm trying to understand how we don't need a principal, we don't need, well, you know what? What bothered me even as a senator when I oversee DOE on my first term was that there was a parent that called me that their child was in the cafeteria. There's 5 classes that didn't have any teachers, and they were all handled by school aides. And I reached out to the board then. There was no movement. Nothing happened. Superintendent, I reached out to the principal, and the principal said, we just don't have any teachers. But you know what? That school had 4 vice principals, and every one of them are certified, and they're getting paid to be a certified teacher. Not one of them went to the cafeteria and pull that class and bring them back in the classroom. It bothers me with that. And it's happening today. You have schools that have more than one vice principal, and when they say they're short of a teacher, that principal or vice principal doesn't go into the classroom. Bothers me because in the budget we're paying for a certified teacher, and every principal and vice principal is getting paid to maintain that salary and doesn't want to teach. It's amazing. Maybe we don't need principals. Maybe we need managers in the school, because that's what we need is managers. Somebody that's going to manage the school and appropriate the function or whatever they need to do. But I didn't see your statement carrying any weight, because if you look at the bill on page 4, we struck out the part there on line 11, this 10 says, the board shall not interfere in the micromanaging affairs of the department or in schools within the department. We struck that out because we wanted the board to be more accountable. If somebody's going to school the Department of Education, it should be the board that should be sued. I believe in that. You're elected by the people of Guam. You need to be held accountable, every board member that's elected. Because we as senators, we're held accountable. Every 2 years, the board's up for election, so are we. And maybe the recommendation, Magait, of Ms. Gutierrez of adding the evaluation of the board members be added here, maybe even remove the stipend. Because I remember when I was on the board, we received a lot less, and then when it increased, I was working at Department of Revenue and Taxation. I reminded the board that, hey, you can't get owed $250. I think you guys only got 114. Because at that time, the Department of Education was not in compliance with the IRS code. And I happened to be a tax investigator at the time. I made sure they were in compliance. I drew the line there. As a board member, I said, no, stop. Superintendent, introduced them to the IRS guy and the Department of Revenue and Tax guy. And they made sure that every one of your stipend is being taxed. Because you weren't being taxed before. We put a stop to that when I was on the board. And also the tax investigator. But with that note, this bill is very simple. It's giving governance, bringing accountability back to the board to do what they need to do. Not to interfere, not to micromanage, just hold the superintendent more accountable. And if anybody's in fear, and if anybody was to say that he doesn't want 6 boss, well, you know what? Those are the 6 people that appointed you or selected you. You know, when they hire a superintendent, it's the board that has to select. So if any superintendent is going to say, I don't want to have that many bosses, wake up, Charlie Brown, because it was that board that selects you. It wasn't the governor, it wasn't anybody outside. It was the people that were elected by the people of Guam to select, hopefully, a very qualified and well-deserved person. And with that, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. Senator Taitigui?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try and make this as quick as possible, considering we have another bill to go, and I'm sure everyone is kind of hungry up here. So very short, this is, to me, it seems like we're swimming backwards right now. I appreciated your testimony, Mr. Ada. You've been one of the oldest individuals who's been sitting on the board and seen what has happened to the board in its time of, where we are today. And I'm concerned because there's many things, unintended consequences. This is a major policy change. There's unintended consequences, that can create conflict, between the board and between DOE. If this bill were to pass, you guys might as well be employees of Department of Education, sitting here and doing all this additional work that's required of you if this bill should pass. I'm really disappointed that we don't have more people here testifying for such a change, in legislation. Where are the other board members? Where is the superintendent? Where are prior superintendents like, Speaker Wampat, who was once, enacting? Where's the deputies here? I mean, this is something that's, we do realize that, DOE is having its problems, especially since, the typhoon. But, and maybe it might help, but what happens when you put too many chefs in the kitchen? You know that saying? So, are we really fixing something in effect for the board? Or are we picking the wrong superintendent to run Department of Education? Is the board acting upon that, which they're given the responsibility to pick somebody that's viable, somebody that knows what they're doing as a superintendent? Are we picking a strong superintendent? Go ahead, Mr. Adit, please.
Thank you very much, Senator. As you were speaking, it was popping into my head. Whenever that there is a problem that has been brought to my attention, I always go to call the administrator and say, hey, are you aware that this is happening? This was brought to my attention, can you please check it? And I leave it there. I don't want to micromanage. That is not our job. Or else I call the superintendent and inform him. That's up to him now what action he's going to take. That's not my job. That's his job. And I like to leave it like that. Now, I would say, and I said it in my presentation towards the end, there are parents that would come to the board and air their concern. It is a procedure that we follow. We refer that situation or that testimony to the superintendent, address this. respond back to the parent who is making this complaint or concern. They have that right to know what is happening. They wouldn't have wasted their time to come to a meeting if it wasn't important. So again, there's a chain of command. But when we have to be, I just don't see myself, Senator. I am retired, and I really doubt that there will be many that you will find who will be willing to go into the Department of Education as a board member, operational to include. They will be required to be there 5 days, maybe even 6 days a week, more than 8 hours a day.
Exactly.
I don't think you're going to find anybody who will do that.
Yeah.
You would
I
definitely
agree.
not.
And that being said, you said something earlier, about influencing, on hiring and firing and et cetera. And, I've actually heard that from several people that boards in the past have done that, where they've tried to influence the superintendent to hire or fire individuals or put their mali or their family member in a position at DOE or change them to a higher position. Now you're giving the board even more of a reason for the, superintendent to, listen to the board and do what they ask them to do. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen, conflict of interest, corruption, there's just so much with the added additional responsibility for the board.
Yeah.
And then I've asked earlier about the subcommittees on these boards. And, I heard that there are several, in different topics. And yet, we don't get a report on that. I mean, we just had a bill earlier that we could have had a report from a subcommittee regarding the bill we heard up earlier today. But there was none, coming from the Board of Education. And now we're requiring the board to do more when they can't even do these subcommittees? So it's a huge concern, and that's a huge task amongst the board members to do these subcommittees, because there's research that's involved in there. But, my concern is, just the decision-making issues, the duplication of efforts, the conflict priorities, like I mentioned earlier, the increased bureaucracy, additional responsibilities, accountability, political influence, conflict of interest, and diverted focus. So, and thank you for your testimony. And thank you too, Ms. Gutierrez, for your testimony as well. And of course, the history behind the board. And yes, it was in the 30th Guam legislature that we created the board, but the 31st, added a little bit more to it. But I think that's where we end right there and start concentrating on how the board pick a good superintendent, because that's where it starts, the superintendent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Taitegui. Senator Quinata?
I'm obviously a co-sponsor on this legislation, and I'm just moving forward with it. It's gonna have its day in our chambers across the hall, and we'll see where it goes from there. Certainly, there's a lot of frustration, so not just from this body, but across this entire island. So that's why we are looking at other parameters and what needs to be reviewed, because if it's not working today, what is it going to be tomorrow? And we're held accountable for ourselves. So this is currently an option for us to explore, and I'm going to explore it with my utmost responsibility. And I thank you guys for both pointing out your perspectives on this legislation. I know you certainly are way older than me, and I'm not questioning you guys' knowledge or experience, but we're just at a different time zone, and we're seeing the same problems popping up. So I just want to see some resolve in all of these issues, and I commend you guys for your public service. It's not easy to be a public servant. That's why it's a very rare breed of people that come up to take up the helms of any public office. It's never easy, but with that being said, Mr. Chair, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Quinata. Senator Paris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I do have reservations about this bill in regards to giving more powers to the board in regards to controlling and directing of all funds. So yeah, I foresee a potential conflict arising should there be a disagreement between the superintendent and the board. But in any case, I do think that there's the need here, the underlying need for this bill, is the need for more accountability and transparency on the role of the superintendent. And I think a lot of this may be based on our most recent experience, right, with the schools, the state of the schools. And so in looking at the current statute, right, all of this, all of the powers of the board receive, evaluate, act upon the recommendations and reports of the superintendent. So this is a power that can hold the superintendent accountable. Other things such as adopt an annual budget and control expenditures accordingly, review periodic financial reports, modify budget. So all of this is within the power of the board, and these are necessary. So in looking at our most recent experience with the state of the schools, I mean, the board had this power. They have this power to hold the superintendent accountable. And so perhaps maybe we could take a look at this again and see how can we strengthen the current language, because obviously something didn't happen in holding the superintendent accountable, the previous superintendent. So what was that? Is it in the language or was it the implementation of the law? And so when we're looking at increasing accountability, I think I would start there and see where can we improve, if not the law, maybe even the processes. The other thing that was brought up that has been discussion was giving more power to the administrators. And so this is something that we probably should revisit because I think what maybe part of the problem is the top-down approach, right? There's a top-down approach. The people in the grassroots, the front lines, are not getting what they need. And so, you know, how do we address that? That's another issue that I don't know if this bill can address, but something that needs to be done. The other thing I see, so when I did attend the board meetings, the live streaming, the access to the board meetings, I felt was very difficult. It wasn't always accessible. And so if we want to hold DOE, the management, more accountable, we need to provide access to that information in real time, as well as the ability to view it afterwards. So I think this is what's missing, is this communication. There's a communication gap that's happening between the management and the people on the ground level. And that this is something that needs to be addressed. Perhaps this could be included in the bill. You know, putting together a communication plan to ensure that all stakeholders are aware of the policies and are, you know, can participate readily. You know, the open lines of communication, I think, is what's needed when we're dealing with DOE. I would suggest, you know, working on those elements before opening up the power to control and direct funds. I mean, that maybe, I don't think this is the right time for this. So I thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Paris.
Senator, can I just answer Senator Paris? Senator Paris, I apologize because communication coming out from the DOE has been very poor. You know, and we have brought that up to the superintendent, and it's, you know, we're monitoring because he has October 1st, he has to submit his self-appraisal from the time he came on board. Yes, even the public, and I have brought that up about when we live stream. People are messaging me, I cannot hear you guys. We cannot hear you, and I brought that up, okay? So I guess bringing it up has not improved. I know that yesterday there was a press release that was brought out, sent out to the media. I don't know if the legislature are included. I don't know why it's not. If it's not there, you didn't receive it. This application ends Friday, September 25th. And it went out to the media. So right away, I guess I may be the only one that's really picky and read every single word that's written. Poor communication. Mr. Dwayne, K57 talk show, because I listen to the show. I listen to what people, because people, they're callers that come calling. He's been trying to get the Department of Education Superintendent's Office, PIO, to get more clarification on his daughter at BMS, because this alternate day and then the online. They said there has been no response, and that's already 5 o'clock, or 4:30, no response. Then I got a parent that called me. They called me to the school to pick up my son's laptop. They have the laptop, but no charger. How could my son use the laptop with no charger? There's about 300 laptops down at DOE. The parent called me. I called DOE downtown. It's 5 o'clock. I think somebody's closing their phone. They're turning off their cell phone 5 o'clock and don't turn it on till 7 o'clock the next morning. I didn't have that issue with Fernandez because his phone is 24/7. Is that interfering? When parents call you, I have to answer. I have to answer. Principals, and I know some of you get principals calling you. They're afraid to talk. They need help. Because the retaliation is not from the board. Retaliation from management. Where are they? I know a lot of you asked for the information about the schools. The board doesn't even know what are the schedules of the school inspection. Principal texts me, Mrs. Do you know when is the inspection for my school? I said, no. Isn't that operational? We haven't heard from the DOE leadership. You tell me now, is that micromanaging? The principal calling me? So I just, whatever is the outcome of the bill, whether it's going to go through or not, I'm fine. But I think you need to hold the board, include self-evaluation from every board member appointed and elected. What have they done? Because I am going to NASB, I'm going to ask, because all state board of education and have self-evaluation, self-assessment. It's a report card. So I don't mind if I grade I put myself at F, because maybe I'm failing my job. I'm failing. But please put that in there. That's my recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. G. Senator Nicolas.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mrs. G, you're what my dad would call a dadaw na baby. But you know what? When in a crisis, that's what we need. When we are experiencing a crisis, when our department is not delivering on the promises, it's people like you that we need. And I see that you support this measure, and I'm also a co-author. There's several things I wanted to say. And I think I'm, just like everybody else up here, very hungry and trying to get out of here on time, but I'm going to go ahead and admit it, but I applaud you, ma'am, and I'm really not a big fan of the board and the manner in which we currently do business. Thank goodness the Lord gave me a good memory. I remember when the governor used to appoint the director, and whenever there was a problem, as a child, I used to see both of them. And the blame, whenever there was blame, it was easy to blame them because it's just the two of them. And now, they broke up the powers of the governor to appoint the directors, and here we are trying to fix problems that maybe should have, just been held by the governor and a superintendent, but that's for another radio show. But I do applaud your efforts, Mrs. G. You scared me when the first time I met you, and I have to give you a lot of credit, because there's a lot of things that are necessary to be done at DOE, and one of them is to restore discipline. And ma'am, if there's anybody in here that I think is the right person to help restore discipline, is you, and I want to help give you the authority to do so. With that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Nicolas. I do see now that Dr. McNinch has showed up to provide. You're going to be providing testimony, sir? Okay, so I apologize to those who have been waiting. We have one more bill to hear after this, so I appreciate you showing up early. But I'm just going to say, anytime you come to a Committee on Education hearing, get ready for the long haul, because obviously there are many differing opinions, and everybody, I think, on all sides of every issue when it comes to education is equally passionate. And so we actually have to take a short recess just to reset the audio, and then we'll come back and hear Dr. McNinch's testimony, and then we'll also move on to the next bill. So we're going to recess for about 5 minutes, okay? So, si Diyos masi, we'll be back.